This comprehensive MERN Stack course takes absolute beginners from zero to deployment. Barak teaches you to create a complete notes application using MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js with professional features like rate limiting and responsive design. By the end of this hands-on tutorial, you'll have built and deployed a fully functional REST API and modern web app.
In this tutorial, we are going to build a beginner-friendly full-stack note-taking application using MongoDB, Express, React, and Node, aka the MERN Stack. I will assume you don't know anything about this tech stack, and as if it is your very first time building an application with it. We are going to start by building our API, then we will test it out to make sure everything is working as expected. Once we are done with it, we will get into the front end with React and complete the entire tutorial. So this is a note-taking application where we can create notes with a title and description, and then we have update and delete actions. And this application will be completely responsive. And at the end of this video, we will deploy the app so that you can have the live link on your resume. This tutorial is completely beginner friendly, so you will learn how to build an API, what are the most common HTTP methods, the status codes, and the difference between SQL and NoSQL databases. And you will even learn how to implement rate limiting, which is a concept that you almost never see on a beginner friendly tutorial. But in this video, we will learn it in the easiest way possible. So that's the entire course. If you're ready, let's get into it. Just before we get started, if you'd like to build more advanced projects with this tech stack, we have a 100-hour course with more than 20 premium projects, such as building a Netflix clone, Spotify, Tinder, and even mobile applications. If you're interested, you can find the discount link in the description. Okay, so let's get started. Now, to be able to follow along with this video, you have to install Node.js. So go ahead and visit nodejs.org and download the long-term support. Once you have done this, you should be good to go. And then for the code editor, I'll be using VS Code. If you want to have the same workspace as I do, maybe you could install this or use whatever you would like to. Okay, once you have done this, just go ahead, create an empty folder on your desktop and just drag and drop it to VS Code, right? You can call this anything. This is the name that I came up with. Now we are going to need two different folders, one for the backend and then the other one for the front end. So in the backend folder, we will build the API, and under the front end, we will build the React application. So first we'll get started with our API. Once we have built everything related to backend, we will jump into the front end folder and build the React application. And before we write any code, I have prepared some diagrams that I'd like to go over. Now it's not really that much, I promise. It's not like a bunch of different slides, not at all. This is something that we would need to visualize some stuff and really enjoy the entire tutorial. You can find the link in the description. It's completely free. Okay, so let's get started with the MERN Stack. The question is, what the hell is the MERN Stack in the first place? Probably everyone knows this already, but M stands for MongoDB, E stands for Express, React, and Node. Now, MongoDB is our database that we'll get into in a second. Express will be the web framework. We'll get into it in a second as well. React will be the front-end library, and Node.js is the runtime. So the beauty of this tech stack is that both in the front end and in the back end, we are using JavaScript, right? You don't really need to learn any other programming languages other than JavaScript. All you need to do, just learn JavaScript and you're good to go. On the front end, we'll be using React, and on the back end, we'll be using Node.js. Okay, so let's try to break this down a little bit. This is what I have prepared right on the right-hand side. Okay, so MongoDB is the database, and to put it simple, you already know this, but it is a place where we store the data, right? That's it. Let's keep it simple and move forward. So we'll be using MongoDB, and we'll get into the details in a couple of minutes. And then the Express will be our web framework, just like I said a couple of seconds ago. And a web framework is a ready-to-use toolbox for building web applications faster and more easily. So you don't really want to reinvent the wheel from scratch, right? Why why do you want to use a web framework? So it'll save a lot of time. It'll make your code cleaner and more organized because they have built everything like from scratch, but someone else built it. And it's really stable, right? Something like Express, which has been used for years and years. So it's completely clean, stable, working perfectly. This is what we'll be using. And then it'll handle common tasks like routing, error handling, and everything that you can think of. And then we have the Node.js, which is going to be the JavaScript runtime. Now, what does that mean? Basically, it'll allow you to run JavaScript on the server. Normally, you can run JavaScript on the client, such as in your browser, but thanks to Node.js, we can run JavaScript on the server. And I hope that makes sense. And then finally, we have the React, which is going to be our front-end library, our favorite front-end library. And we'll get into the details, but I assume you know the basics of React, like super basics, like components, maybe use state and use effect. That should be it. Okay, so now that we know the basics of Node.js and Express, let's get started with it and build a really simple application. So I'll visit VS Code under the backend. First, I'll open up my terminal. The shortcut is Command J or Control J. So I will cd under the backend folder. So if you just type BA or BAC or only B and press tab, it's going to autocomplete. And then you can say initialize a Node.js application. So we can say npm init-y, which is going to give us a package JSON file where we can install different packages. So the first thing I'd like to do, clear my terminal and install Express. So I'll say npm install Express. Now, if you type this out, by default, it'll give you the Express version 5. But I'd like to use a specific version, which is going to be 4.18.2. So we'll be using some specific versions so that if you're watching this video in the future, it should not be obsolete. So you can still follow along with me the exact same way that I do, so nothing will break in the future. And the Express version 5 just came out. Currently, like, everyone still uses Express version 4. So don't ever feel like this video is outdated. Not at all. Express version 4 is actually the version that currently everyone uses. Every single code base has it, okay? So it's not obsolete at all, not outdated, nothing. It's like up to date. Okay, let's go ahead and install it, which is going to give us a package log JSON as well as the Node modules. So these are the things that you don't really work with at all. Let's try to create a file. The convention is to either call them like index.js or let's say app.js, and we even have server.js. These are the conventions. I'll be going with the name server.js. Okay, let's create this file and let's import Express. Now I'd like to use this syntax where I can say import Express from Express. You cannot really use it by default. Let's try to run this file actually. I'll show you the warning and then we'll fix it. Let's say const create an Express app. Actually, this should be app. Let's say Express, call the method. And now we can listen on a port. I'll say app.listen. You can put any port. I'll be going with this value. So I would say just follow along with me. And then once we start listening, we can put a console log. Let's say server started on port, let's say 5001. Okay, now we would like to run this file. You can open up your terminal and you can just say npm run server.js. This would not work, obviously. So what you'd like to do, let's just run this. This is something that does not work. Maybe you have seen something like npm run dev in other tutorials. Now by default, this is also not going to work. And I'll show you how we can make that work. But if you want to run this file by default, you would say run this with Node.js. So we would say node and then server.js. Okay, so it says server started on this port. And we have a warning that I just mentioned. It's coming because we're using the import syntax. Now to be able to get rid of this, just visit the package.json and here put the type to be module. By default, it is common.js where you need to use this syntax. So if you were to say express require the Express package. So this and this means the exact same thing, but they're just different syntaxes, right? So let's try to save, and we shouldn't really have any warnings if you kill it with Control-C and then run this again. Now we don't really have any errors. But if you want to use the import-export syntax, you need to add the type to be equal to module. Now we don't really have that error if we try to run this. Okay, so that's the very first thing that I wanted to mention. Now, if you wanted to run this file with a script such as npm run dev, you would create this script. So this is the key. Let's put the key called dev, and then we would like to basically run this when we say npm run dev, right? So we will say delete everything here. We will say node server.js. When you say npm run dev, behind the scenes it'll run this part. Now let's run this. It is working as expected. So I know that we are going really slowly, but I just want to make sure that we understand everything as we go. Now you can create more scripts if you really wanted to. So you can say something like hello. The key doesn't really matter. What matters is what you will run on the right hand side. So we don't really want to have something like hello. Instead, we'll have something called start. This is something that we'll get into in a second. But first, I'd like to just save this file and get into the server.js file. So here on the backend, under the server.js, we are going to build an API. I'll explain what that means. But first, let's just build a really simple route, and then we'll understand what that does. So here I'd like to say something like app.get method. So listen for the, let's say, /API/ I don't know, let's say something like notes. Here, once we get the get request, we would like to run a function, which is going to take the request and response. So let's say request and response. So these are the things that Express will pass by default. You can take those values and maybe send a response. Let's say res.send. We can say something like, you got 5 notes. Now let's try to test this out. We need to kill this and run it again because we have changed something under the server.js. So I'll go ahead and run this once again. Let's try to send a request to localhost and our route and our port, which is 5001. Let's say 5001 /API/notes. Now we need to type this out because this is what we are listening to, right? With a get method. So I'll go ahead, send a request. This is the output. This is the response that we got. So believe it or not, but we have just built our very first API where we are listening for a get request and we are handling it properly. Now, obviously, this is not what we would like to do. This is just for testing purposes. But let's see what is an API in the first place. And just before we get into the APIs, let's see how a full stack app works in the first place. So you would have your client, which is the front end, and we have a server, right, which is our backend. And then we have a database where we store the data. So from the client, user would send a request. Here, let's say they want to delete a post, right? They click this button, they would send a request to the server. So we got the request. Now we would like to delete it from the database. The backend will delete it and send a response back like success. Here you go, this post has been deleted and the UI will be updated. So this is what we call the request and response lifecycle, right? You send a request and get a response back that would either successfully done or it would fail. So this is how a full stack application works simply. But now on the server, there are one more thing that we need to talk about, which is the API. So what's up with API? It stands for Application Programming Interface, which is absolutely doesn't make any sense, but in simple terms, it allows two different applications talk to each other, right? So you can think of it like a waiter. This is a pretty classic analogy that we'll go through, but I think this explains everything like perfectly, really clearly. Okay, so we have the waiter, which is the API. Let's say you visit a restaurant where you would like to send a request, right? You are the customer, you send a request. Let's say you want to get a chicken. Once it is ready, you will get it as a response back, right? So I just changed the color. You send a request and get a response back. And we have this man in the middle, which is the API. So that was the analogy. And in real world, you would send a request from your browser, right? You would send a request and get a response back, either success or error. But in either case, you would get a response back. So I really hope this makes sense. And this is actually what we have just built in simple terms. So we have the end user, which is here on the browser. It is us. We sent a request to this endpoint, to this URL, and we got a response back, right? Now in real world, and this is what we'll be doing in a couple of minutes, you would actually send a request, let's say here, before you send a response, you would interact with your database, right? You would send a request like, let's say, delete a post or delete a node, and maybe you would have another endpoint where you would like to create a node, right? These are the things that we'll be doing. But I hope for now everything makes sense. This is what we have built in simple terms. Now the question is, can't we just get rid of this API, the man in the middle? Can't we just interact with our database from the, let's say, from the front end? Why do we need it in the first place? Why do we need an API? So the answer is we definitely need an API no matter what. So you cannot really just access to the database. You cannot just interact with the database from the front end. Now, why this is the case? So imagine this, like 90% of your users will be good-hearted, right? They'll be good customers, but some of them will be really malicious. Let's even put an emoji. So they'll be really malicious and they'll like to kill your entire server, right? They'll like to delete everything that you have in the database, or maybe they would like to access everything other than just nodes. Let's say they would get access to every single password, so on and so forth. So you cannot really trust to the front end, to the client. Instead, you would have a waiter, which is someone that you can trust, and it's only going to do the things that you want to happen, right? So just to give you another example, let's say you get rid of the API, which is the waiter. Now your malicious user can just walk into the kitchen and steal something, right? It can, like, they can even break the entire kitchen. So that's why you always want to have the man in the middle, which is the API. So I hope that makes sense. Now there are different types of APIs. The one that we are interested in is the REST API, which is the most popular one. Like, this is what we're going to be building in this video. You can take a look at the other types of APIs, but 99% of the times you will be working with a REST API. Okay, now it uses HTTP methods, which are get, post, put, delete, and there is more like patch, but these are the ones that you'll see the most, right? 99% of the times, this is what you'll encounter. And the names are pretty self-explanatory. So when you send a GET request, probably you want to get some data, right? To give an example, you would like to get some posts on Instagram. When you want to do so, you would send a GET request. And in this example, we sent a GET request to fetch our notes, right? And if you want to create one, you would send a POST request. If you want to update, you would send PUT request. And then to delete something, you would send a delete request. And here in the backend, we are listening for the GET request, right? This basically says if we get a request, a GET request under API and notes, just go ahead, send the notes, right? Let's delete this comment. Okay, so here you got a GET request and you would send the notes, right? And if you want to create something, let's say you would listen for the POST request, and user would send you a POST request. This part could be anything. You can just say API/hello, anything that you wish, but most of the time it should be something that makes sense. Here, let's say they would like to create the node, and then like instead of this, we'll get into it. We'll build it with actual code, but these are just examples for now. And then you could create, let's try to duplicate this. So you can create the put method, right? And it's actually auto-completing. So we have patch, we have delete, so on and so forth. We'll get into every single one of them. But this is basically what we have. And then there are some status codes. So it starts from 100 all the way up to 500 that we'll get into. I have a bunch of different examples that we'll go over. So any status code that starts with 100 is informational. This is something that you are not really encountered that much, but just know that 100 status codes are informational. And then anything that starts with 200 is a success message, and 200 itself is okay, like everything worked as expected, right? Everything went successfully. And then 201, which means something created successfully. So let's say you created a node, you would get 201 from the backend, right? Let's try to actually do it. Here under the get request, just before we send the response, you can say res.status. We can just say 200. It is done successfully. If you had the post request, you could say 201. Let's say your node has been created successfully. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. 200, anything includes 200 means success. And these are the most popular ones that you should keep in mind. And then we have 300, which stands for redirection. Again, not something that you would encounter that much, but I just put it here so that you can have it in your notes. So let's read it out loud. The 300 status codes are for redirection, meaning the server is telling the client, hey, the thing you are looking for is somewhere else. Let's take a look at an example on the 301 status code, which means removed permanently. Sorry. Okay, so let's take a look at the example. Let's say your site changes from http://example.com to https://example.com. So you just changed something, and then you would set up a 301 redirect so that the visitors and Google would know to go to the new one, right? To go to the new one. Again, this is not something that you'll encounter that much, but just keep this in mind. So yeah, you can have this in your notes. Alright, and then finally we have the error status codes, which are 400 and 500, right? The ones that include 400 or 500. Now let's see, I'd like to just immediately show you an example before we read it. So we have 404, the most popular error message, which means not found. Let's try to see it in action immediately. So I'll say API/hello, which is something that we don't really have. We're gonna get 404 error. Now if you say inspect and visit network, refresh this page, and just make sure you select the fetch XHR or maybe even all. Okay, just refresh, you got 404 status code, right? It means you don't really have this route. Okay, so once you have 404, it means there are some errors on the client. So think of it like you as the client, you as the user, you just messed something up, right? You sent a request to a wrong URL, or maybe you are unauthorized, but you try to create something. So to give an example, let's say you are on Instagram, without logging in, you cannot share something. If you try to do so, you're gonna get 401, which means unauthorized. Okay, so that means the client errors happen when the problem is on the user side, meaning your browser or your application made a bad request. These are the most popular ones that you should keep in mind. So 400 bad request, it says like this is invalid. 401 unauthorized, you must be logged in. 403 forbidden, you're not allowed to access the site. 404 not found, and 429 too many requests. So we'll see this one as well. This is something that I'd like to leave it later in the video. And then finally we have the 500, which means the server errors. And you would get these server errors when something goes wrong on the server side. So even though you made a valid request, just because server couldn't make that work, you'll get a 500 status code. So you can think of it like the server tried, but it failed. And the most popular status codes are right here, which are 500 and 503. So 500 is a general error that says internal server error, right? So something is broken on the server side. And 503, which means service is unavailable, where the server is temporarily down, it is overloaded, it is like there are some maintenance, anything, you name it, it is just down, right? you cannot access it. And to give you an example, this is the 500 and 503 error page for GitHub. So currently GitHub is up and running, right? You can get the response, but if it was temporarily down, you would get this output, which gives you 503 status code. Okay, so I hope everything makes sense. Now I know that we went really slow so far. I just wanted to explain everything that you would need to be able to follow along with this video. We'll get into even more details just in a couple of minutes, but for now, this is what we would need to get started with it. And I'll go ahead, clear this up. Let's say for now, we can have this get request only. It is working as expected. So for now, if these are the things that you have seen for the very first time, maybe you can watch this section once again. So from start up until now, and maybe you can go over these diagrams. I think these are really important details that you should know, that you should keep in mind. However, if it is confusing, that's completely fine. It is too much information at the beginning, but we are going to get into the tutorial. We're going to write a lot of code, so everything should make sense. I'll see you in the next section where we'll work on our code base. Alright, so this is where we left. Now there is something really annoying in our code. Let's try to fix it. And before we fix it, let's try to understand what that is. Now you got 5 nodes as the response. Let's try to see it in action. Let's try to fix this. I'll say visit nodes. We got this response. But now every single time I update this, let's say I'll say 10 nodes. If I save and try to refresh this page, I'll still get the old result. Which means every single time I have a change in my code, I need to kill my terminal and make sure you're under the backend. And I need to run this all over again, which is really annoying, right? Now, if you take a look at the result, it will be updated. But this is not something we would like to have. Instead, every single time, once we save, once we change something, this should restart. So for this, we are going to install a package. Let's kill the terminal, clear this up with Command K or clear. If you're on Windows, you can say CLS. It should clear the terminal. So I will say npm install, the package name is nodemon, and I'll say -d, which means install it as a dev dependency. So let's go ahead and run this. Now we will visit package.json. We got the nodemon, here we go, and we will say run the server.js with nodemon, not node. Let's say nodemon. Now if you save and try to say something like npm run dev, it'll do the exact same thing, but instead it'll run it with the nodemon. So it is going to listen for every single change. It is going to watch it. Let's say you just said it's going to be 20. Once you save, it'll be restarted so that you can get the latest output without killing your terminal. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. This is something that you should definitely do in development. Otherwise, it's not really going to be comfortable. Okay, so now that we understand the nodemon and how to use it, I'd like to add another script, which is going to be for production. So this dev basically means development, right? You would like to run this while you're developing the application. This is exactly what we are doing. Currently, we are changing our code really often, right? So that's why we run this app with the development script. But once we deploy the application, we would like to run with a command called start, where we don't really want to use nodemon. Instead, we'll say, go ahead, run the server.js file with node, so that you don't really listen for the changes. We don't really need it, right? Once we deploy the app, probably we will never change the code. Even if we change, the application will be deployed again. So I know that it might sound complicated, but I hope you get the point. We will see this in action once we get into the deployment, so it's not going to be really complicated. For now, just know that this is something that you would like to run in development, just like what we are doing, because currently we are developing the application, and then once we deploy, we'll be using the start command. Okay, so this is something that you should keep in mind as a beginner. Okay, so this is something that you should keep in mind. Let's kill the terminal and go into the server.js file. Let's try to define some of our routes, and then we'll get into the database in the next section. So I just said let's define some of our routes. You might be asking, what does that mean? Basically, this is a route that we have. We are listening with a get method under this URL. Once we got the request, we will do something, calculate, and send it back to the client. So this entire thing, what we call a route. There is also what we call the endpoint, something really common that you'll hear. Let's read it out loud. An endpoint is a combination of a URL and HTTP method that lets the client, that lets the user interact with a specific resource. So this is our very first endpoint that we have built. Let's try to duplicate it. If you wanted to, you can type this out. Let's do it actually. Let's say user wants to create a node. They would send a post request to /API/nodes, and then we would get the request and response objects. And then we would, for now, let's say res.status of 201. And remember, this means something created successfully. And then we can send a message. You can either use the send, or like this would actually send a response under the HTML, but we would like to mostly send a JSON response. So I'll say JSON, and let's send a message like post created successfully. Okay, and then we can duplicate this. We'll add another route where they would like to update a node. So we'll say it's going to be 200. Let's say post updated successfully. So these are for testing purposes. Of course, we will interact with the database a bit later in the video. Okay, now one thing is really important right here. If you want to update something, you would like to know which post that is or which node that is, right? You cannot randomly just go into the database and update something. You would like to get the ID of that specific node. So user will send it. So let's say they will send a request to localhost 5001 /API/nodes. Let's say the node that they'd like to delete has this ID. So they will send to anyone, you will get that ID, and you will delete that one specifically. Now this value could be anything, right? You don't really know that. So that's why we say this will be dynamic. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Since we are updating something, we'll say put method. And let's create one more for the delete, for the deletion. If we want to delete something, once again, we would like to get the ID so that we know which node that we are trying to delete. I'll say node, let's update them. Node deleted successfully. Okay, so for now, that's gonna be it for our endpoints, for our routes. In the next section, we are going to integrate our database, which is going to be MongoDB. Okay, so this is where we left. Just in the previous section, I said that we'll get started with the database, but I'd like to take a quick break and organize this code base. So let's make this a little bit more cleaner by following the best practices. So this is how you would do as a complete beginner, right? Without knowing anything, you would just put your entire code under the server.js, which is fine, but if the project gets really large, this is going to be unmanageable. So what you would like to do, take all these functions, routes, and put them under different folders and files. Because if you think about it, maybe this function will be around 50 lines of code. This will be 70 lines of code, so on and so forth. This file will get 1000 lines of code, and you cannot really manage it. So what you can do instead, let's delete these spaces. We can take every single one of these routes under different folders. So I'll create one called routes. Let's create a file called nodes route, or let's say nodes routes.js. You can call this anything, but this is one of the conventions that we have. Okay, so at first this will look a little bit complicated, but please follow along with me for the next 2 minutes and then everything will make sense. So here in this file, you would like to import Express because we'll be doing something. Let's say import the Express, and we would like to create a router. Let's say use express.router, Okay, just make sure that R is capitalized. And then we can say export this one. I'll say export default router. Now we can put our endpoints. So first, let's just save. We'll add something here. And let's try to comment all of them. Now, just before I comment this, I'd like to mention something. So here in this file, if you have realized, every single one of these routes has something in common, which is /API/notes. So instead of typing this out on every single route, we can just remove it and only type it out only once. Okay, so I'll just comment this out and I'll say, just maybe at the very beginning, right after the app, and I'll delete this comment. We don't really need it. If you wanted to, you can put it in your notes, but I'll delete that. Okay, so I'll say app.use. So you would use .use without any methods, because we will take these methods and put it under the routes. So let's say if we got a request to /API/notes, if it starts with this one, we would like to hit this file, which is something that we can import. Let's say import nodes routes from, let's go into the routes and visit this file. Just make sure to put the .js at the end. Okay, so I'll say get this file. Now let's take every single one of them. I'll basically cut this, save, and go into this file. Now let's try to create these. So instead of app.get, we'll say router.get. And you can put the exact same thing, but we don't really want to put this /API/notes because it is already prefixed. Again, this will make sense. Just for now, follow along with me. We'll just say only / and then we can get this method and put it right here. Let's try to delete the comments. Okay, so that's it for the very first route, which was this one, right? Where we can get the nodes. Let's say you just fetched the nodes. Okay, we'll do the exact same thing for these ones. If you wanted to, you can pause the video and do so. I'll say router.post. Again, instead of app, you would say router.post. You don't really need to type this out. It is already added. We'll just say /, and then we'll get this part, which is our handler function. Let's delete the comments, save, and I'll be doing the same thing for these ones. Let's copy it, paste it. Probably this is what we should be doing until now. Let's say router, but just delete this part because it is already included, right? /API/notes. We already have this, it is prefixed, but we would like to add the /ID at the end. Now this should be making sense completely. And then I'll get these two as well. We don't really need to put, we just put that. And then let's say router.delete. And again, we already have this, so we can just leave this part. Okay, so let's save, kill the left-hand side and put them side by side. Let's see what we have just did. So it's really clear what we have done, right? We basically take all those previous endpoints and prefix them with /API/notes. So if you send a request to /API/notes, you're gonna hit this and you would get this response. If you hit with a post request, you would get this response. If you hit /API/notes /SOMEID with the put method, you would get this response, and same for the delete. I hope all makes sense, right? Let's actually test this out. If we just visit this part with a get request, we should be able to get this response. So I'll go right here. I'll say /API/notes. Let's refresh. We just fetched the nodes. Let's try to say it'll be /API/nodes /something. Let's do it. Say if you refresh now, this should say cannot found, but let's say /something. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. We just link them by prefixing this. So that was the very first thing that we have done. Now again, what we can do, even organize this even more, because if you think about it, these functions can get really large, right? What we would like to do, just take them and put as a separate file and folder. This is what we call a controller, right? we have a bunch of different controllers. So this is the first one, second one, so on and so forth. Let's create the controllers, and these controllers will be for the nodes. Let's say nodes controller.js, and then basically we will cut them one by one. So I'll just cut this. Let's paste this in, and let's call this as a function. So you can create it as an arrow function. Let's say const get all nodes. Okay, this is the function. Now we can export it. Let's say get all nodes, and make sure to put the .js at the end. If you wanted to, you can make this as a regular function as well. Let's do it pretty quickly. I'll say we will export this function. Let's say export function get all nodes. We would delete this part and this one. Okay, this is the other way of writing it. Let's just have it as a function or arrow function. It doesn't really matter. And you can mark them as async if you really wanted to. It's just a regular function, right? So you can call it as async or not, depending on what you'll be doing with it. Okay, now we can get this one. I know that we are going slowly, but I just don't really want to rush. Let's just go slowly. I'll go ahead and duplicate this one. Let's say create a node, or let's just say create node, and I'll just paste what we have copied. I'll just leave the response. Okay, let's do the same thing for this one. I'll say create node, import it from this file. This is to update a node. I'll say export function, paste this in, give it a name like update node, and let's try to do the same thing for the delete. Say delete node, and I'll get the response. Let's cut this and paste this in. Okay, we would like to import them now. Delete this entire thing. I'll delete the extra spaces. Okay, so what we have done is basically take these controllers and put it under the specific file. So everything should be working as exactly as it was before. Now the beauty of this code base is that later at some point, let's say you want to add some stuff related to products. You can basically create this route and create this file. Let's say it'll be product routes. So you can add your product routes under a specific file. Let's say you will have another one for, let's say, posts. Maybe you're building some social media application. You would add, let's say, something related to payments. You would add something like emails. So you get the point. This file otherwise would be incredibly large, but now it's just only 5 lines of code where you just separated every single service into its own file. Okay, so I hope all makes sense, and we even more optimized it by creating this controller file. So that's kind of it for this section, I was going to say. But one more thing, one of the best practices is to create a source folder. So you can create this one and put everything related to application under the source. So just go ahead, put the controllers and the routes as well as the server.js file. But if you do so, you will notice that your application will crash. Now, why is that? Can you spot? Well, it's because under the scripts, you say run the server.js file, but now it is under the source folder, right? It's not under the backend. So you would like to say it's under the source. Let's fix this one as well. And you don't really have to fix this part, but let's be consistent. And let's say our main entry point is the server.js file, which is under the source folder. Okay, so if you save, kill the terminal, and run this from scratch, it should be working properly. Okay, so that's kind of it for the optimization section. So with that, in the next section, we'll get started with the database. Alright, so in this section, we are going to get started with the MongoDB, which is going to be our database. It's completely free to get started with. You don't really need to pay anything, or you don't even need to provide with your credit card. So head over to mongodb.com and create an account. I have already done this, so I'll go ahead and log in. I have logged in with my Google account. It'll just redirect me to the dashboard. Okay, so we will create a project in a second, but first let's go over these nodes that I have. We basically have 3 different comparisons between SQL databases versus NoSQL databases. So MongoDB is a NoSQL database, and then we have some SQL databases like Postgres or let's say MySQL, so on and so forth. And for the NoSQL databases, we have other examples like Cassandra or let's say Neo4j, so on and so forth. Okay, so in SQL databases, data is stored in tables with rows and columns. So it is like a spreadsheet. And then in NoSQL databases, they store data like JSON or key value pairs, which is good for changing data shapes. So the SQL databases are a bit more strict when it comes to how you store the data, but NoSQL databases are a bit more flexible. And then the SQL databases use SQL language, so you would use things like select, insert, so on and so forth. But when it comes to NoSQL databases, they would use a query language. And each NoSQL database has its own way of querying, often simpler and faster for certain tasks. And we're going to see this once again. And then finally, you might be asking, when do we use a SQL database and when do we use a NoSQL database? So you would use a SQL database whenever you need like complex queries, or let's say you have a lot of relationships in your application. So to give an example, let's say you are building a really large social media application where you have a bunch of different relations between your data, right? So this could be a perfect example to use a SQL database. Or let's say you are building a really large or just a bank application, right? Everything has to be really strict and you have a bunch of relations. And when it comes to NoSQL databases, so it is great for fast changing data or huge amounts of data. So these are the things that you can keep in mind. But as a beginner, it doesn't really matter if you use MongoDB or Postgres or MySQL, right? All you have to, all you want at the moment is to have a place where you can store the data and interact with it, manipulate it, so on and so forth, right? Okay, I hope that makes sense. So with all this in mind, we can head over to dashboard and create a new project. So here I'll just say view all my projects, and then I'll create a new one. Let's call this as thinkboard. Let's say next, create the project where we need to create a cluster. So we'll go with the free plan. Okay, so let's say create a deployment. I'll leave everything as it is. Okay, come on. Let me go over this AI check. Once it is done, you will be redirected to this page. Let's copy the password. So just make sure you copy it. Let's say create the database user and then choose a connection method. So we will connect to our database from our Node.js application. So let's select the drivers option. Okay, so the first option is to select your driver and version. We'll just leave them as it is. The second step is to install MongoDB. But instead of using the MongoDB driver, we'll be using something called Mongoose. So let's search for it. Okay, we'll be using this. It's a lot more cleaner and it'll give some strict rules where we can have our schema, the schema validation, which is something that we'll get into. So we can skip this step. And finally, once it is done, they will provide you a connection string. Now that we got this, we can copy it. I'll have the password open so that it is included. I'll just copy it. If you cannot see your password, it would look like this, and you would delete this part, paste your password that we have just copied a couple of seconds ago. But probably you have this option. So go ahead, turn this on, copy it, and paste it to your code base. For now, just put it under the server.js. We'll be using it. Okay, so we can just say done, and we can actually get started with it. Now, just before we connect to this database, I would like to go under the network access. So currently, this would include your current IP address. From this IP address, you can connect to this database, but we don't really want to get any errors. So I'll say add an IP address where we can access from anywhere, right? So I'll say confirm. This will take around 10 to 15 seconds. Once it is done, it should be active. Okay, so it's done, it's active. In my case, it took around 30 seconds, but now we are good to go. let's go under the clusters, let's say browse collections, but obviously we don't really have anything, right? 0 databases and 0 collections. So let's use this connection string where we can connect to our database. But before we do so, let's open up the terminal, let's kill the backend. Just make sure you are under the backend. And as I said, we would like to use Mongoose. So I'll say npm install, you would say Mongoose, and you would press enter normally, but let's use a specific version, as I said, at the beginning, so that if you're watching this tutorial at a future date, it should still work as expected. So I'll go with 7.0.3. We'll go with this version. Let's install it. Okay, now we can clear the terminal and say npm run dev. Okay, now let's copy this connection string and try to connect to our database. I'll just cut this, and to be able to connect to my database, I would like to create a specific folder where we can put our configurations. So I'll say config, and let's say db.js file. Here we'll create a function where we can connect to the database. So I'll say const connect db, and this will be an async function, let's say. And we'll have a try and catch block. In the try, we would like to connect our database successfully, but if we got some errors, we'll hit the catch where we can just add a console log. Now, first thing I'd like to do is importing, let's say import mongoose from the mongoose package. Okay, so it's really easy to connect to your database. All you have to say mongoose.connect and then put your connection string. So I'll just paste this in. Now this will take a little bit of time, so we'd like to await this, and then once this is done, let me just kill the left hand side. I'll say console log, let's say MongoDB connected successfully. Okay, and in the catch we can add another console log. Let's even say console.error. I'll say error connecting to MongoDB, and then we can put the error.message, or let's just put the error itself. Now let's try to save this and try to call this method. So I'll say export this from this file, and under the server.js we can just call that method. So I'll say call the connect db, and just make sure to put the .js at the end. Now let's save and take a look at the terminal. Okay, MongoDB connected successfully. Now if you try to break this, right, I'll just delete the some part of the password. Now it is wrong. Okay, here we can see we got an error. It says bad authentication. The authentication has failed. So we hit the catch block. As you can tell, it says error connecting to MongoDB, and then we would see the error itself. So I'll do Ctrl+Z, bring this back, and we are good to go. Now the other thing that you would like to do in the catch block, if you got some errors, you would like to exit the process. So you'll say process.exit, and the status code is going to be 1. Now 1 means exit with failure. Okay, but if you had 0, that means success. But since we are in the catch block, this is going to be 1, which means failure. Now let's save this code and take a look at our database. So I'll try to refresh this page. We should see some kind of a database, or we cannot really see it because we didn't really create any data or any collections. But the problem that I'm trying to mention is that we didn't really give a name for our database, right? This is currently called as test, okay? So if we don't put anything, your database will be test. But let's try to update it. I'll say notes_db, and you would put your database name just before the question mark. So this is something to keep in mind. We just updated that. And once we create a database, once it is visible in this dashboard, I'll mention this once again, we will see this name. Now you might be thinking this code is perfectly fine, but it's not really. Because if you deploy this code to GitHub, if someone opens up your db.js file, they can see your connection string, and they can use it, like they can connect your database because they're able to see your username and your password. So what you'd like to do, cut this from here and put it somewhere else. And this is where the .env file comes into play. So under the backend, let's shrink everything. We will create the .env file, and we can put our connection string. So I'll say mongo_URI, and let's say this will be equal to this value. We can delete the quotes. Okay, just paste this in as the string that you have just cut it. Okay, let's save. Now, how do we use this value? How do we get this key and then the value? So to be able to use this, you need to get a package. Let's open up the terminal. I'll say npm install.env. So this is a package that allows you to get access to environment variables. So this is what we call an environment variable, by the way. Now that we have installed the package, let's run the app. So I think we are getting a deprecation warning. This is something that we can take a look at it in a second. For now, just ignore this. It's not really important. And it has nothing to do with the .env package. So for now, just ignore that. We'll go under the server.js. Let's try to configure the .env package. Now, why do we need it? So if you currently say console log process.env and then your environment variable name, now this will give you undefined in the terminal. So here you can see you cannot read this value. To be able to use it, you need to say import .env from the .env package. Let's type this out. And then you would say .env.config. Call this method. Once you have done this, you should be able to get that value instead of undefined, right? Previously it was undefined, but now we can get the value. And if you put this something wrong, let's just add 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's not gonna work. It's undefined because you have to put this name. So now that you know how to access the environment variables, let's cut it from here and we will add it right here. So let me delete the spaces. I'll say process.env.mongo_URI. Okay, now we are going to hide this file in GitHub so that no one can see our connection string, right? This is now a secret environment variable. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I'll just try to go over it pretty quickly once again. So we didn't really put our connection string as it is. Instead, we take it and put it under the .env file so that it is a secret. No one can see it other than us. It is only it's only available locally in our machine. If we deploy our code to GitHub, we will hide this file with a gitignore file, which is something that we'll do at the end of this video. So no one can see this value. Okay, so this is that file that you need for the secret variables. And to be able to use it, we have installed this package called .env, and then we call the config method to be able to properly use it. Now, another convention is to get your port and put it under the .env. So this is exactly what I'll be doing. I'll just say port, all uppercase, and I'll put this value. Now you don't have to do it, but I would recommend it. So let's get this value. I'll say const port, which is going to be coming from the .env, say port. And if, let's say this is undefined, we can add this fallback value. So if this is equal to false or undefined, we will get this value. Now let's put this in. I'll just say use this port, and we can add this dynamic value. So I'll just say add the port at the end. Okay, so this is going to work as exactly as it was before, but we just updated our code. Now, what's up with this error? I don't really know. I think it's because of the Mongoose package. Maybe this version is causing this. So what I'll be doing is kill the backend. Let's say npm install mongoose at latest. Okay, now it's been updated. So in your case, just don't type at latest. Go ahead, put this version. Okay, so just say npm install mongoose and paste this in. It should update it. Now let's try to run the app. Hopefully you'll get rid of that error or the warning. Okay, now we don't really have that warning that we got previously. And for the .env, by the way, I think I just said npm install .env. Go ahead, add this at the end. If you have already done this, it's completely fine. Just do it once again, add this at and the version itself. And then you can start your backend. Okay, so server started and then MongoDB connected successfully. Now the next thing that we would like to do is to create a model. So let's try to create this folder called models, and we'll have only one model that will be Node.js. So this is one of the conventions where you capitalize the very first letter and you put it as a singular, right? So you don't say nodes. Instead, it is the Node.js. So we will create a model for the node because let me show you the end result. Here we have some screenshots. So every single node has some values like a title, a description, right? This is the description of the node, and then we have things like created at date and updated at. So these are the things that we would like to store, and let's create the model so that we know which fields a node will have. I know that it might not make too much sense, but let's see this in action. The first thing you would like to do is to import the Mongoose from the Mongoose package. And then you would first create a schema. So let's say first you would create a schema, and then second you would create a model based off of that schema. Let's see how that works. So first let's create the schema. I'll say const node schema. You can call this anything, but this is the name that I'll have. I'll say new mongoose.schema. And this wants you to add an object. So here we will put our fields. Let's say every single node will have a title, which is going to be type of string. So let's just say type is going to be string, and then we can say it'll be required. So every single node has to has a title. Let's say required will be equal to true. And then the other fields that we would like to have is the content, which is the description. I'll call it as content. You can call this anything, but I would say just follow along with me. So put the content, let's say, again, type will be string, and then it'll be required as well. So I'll just duplicate that and put this in. Now the other thing we would like to have is the created at field, so that we can put the created at right here in the node. So you can type this out manually, right? You can say created at and put this as a date, but the better option is to add another object. So here just say timestamps will be equal to true. Okay, so MongoDB by default will give you the created at and updated at fields if you add this timestamps of true. And I would highly recommend you to add this option in your schemas. Okay, now that we have the schema, we can create the model based off of this schema. So I'll say const node. Again, it should be capitalized and singular, right? Let's say mongoose.model. Call this as node, and just take a look at the schema that we have. Then we'll say export default this model. So what this says, basically create a node model based off of this schema. So every single node will have a title, it'll have a content, and then it'll add the timestamp whenever they create it. So we'll be using this node in other files to be able to interact with the nodes, where we can create one, update one, delete, so on and so forth. Okay, so just go ahead, save this file, and we should be good to go. And I have just updated these comments so that you can have it in the source code. Alright, so that's gonna be it for this section where we have created a database, connect to it, and then we have created our model, right? And finally, we also learned about the .env package, where we can access our environment variables so that we can keep our secrets separately from our codebase. Okay, so that's gonna be it for this section. In the next one, we can get started with our actual controllers. They are currently just hard-coded. They are a test. We would like to obviously communicate with our database, where we can fetch them, create them, update, and delete. Okay, so with this in mind, I'll see you in the next section. Alright, so this is where we left. In the last section, we have connected to our database. Now we'll get started with the controllers that we have. So this is the very first one, where we would like to get every single node. Currently, we don't really have anything in the database, so this should return something like an empty array, right? So let's first get started with the code and just see how we can create this controller. So first I'll mark this as async because we'll have some promises. So let's delete this part. I'll say try and catch block. Now in the try, we can just fetch every single node. I'll say const nodes and let's say await, import the node model that we have. Let's import it, say from, just go under the, maybe just above, under the models and get this Node.js. Once again, make sure to include the extension at the end. Now we will say node.find, which is going to give you every single node. If you wanted to fetch some specific ones, you can add this filter, but we basically want to get every single one of them. And then let's say as the response, we can send the status code of 200 and we can say JSON, just send the nodes. In the catch, that means the server failed, right? If we hit the catch block, we can say res.status of 500. This is something that we have told in the past. And we'll just say JSON for the message. We can say something like internal server error. And for debugging purposes, you can put the error in the console. So I'll say console.error. Let's say error in get all nodes method, or let's say controller, and then just put the error itself. Okay, let's try to test this out. Now we can send a GET request from our browser, right? You can visit /API/nodes, just send the request. We got a response of an empty array, right? And we can use something else in a desktop application called Postman, which is completely free to get started with. This is what I have. So I have already installed it. I'll just go ahead and get this. Okay, so it will start the application. Now, thanks to this application, we can send put request, post request, so on and so forth, right? So these are the things that I have done in the past. Let's create something new. Let's say send an HTTP request to our endpoint. Now we can copy our URL. Let's go right here. It'll be a GET request and then send the request. We got an empty array. Now let's try to break something in our code. So here I'll just say find, I don't know, like find X, which is a method that we don't have. Is our application crashed? No, it didn't. Let's try to send the request. Okay, as you can tell, we got the message, internal server error. The status code is equal to 500. Okay, so this is how that works. Let me try to zoom in. And I'll just maximize the screen. So that was the very first thing that we have built, the very first controller. The next one, the other one that I'd like to create is going to be this one. So let's go ahead and delete the content and get started with it. And I'd like to mark all of these as async. Let's say async function. Now, before we write any code, let's think about it. If user wants to create a node, they need to send a title as well as a content, right? Let's pretty quickly see this in action. So right here under the create page, if they want to create a node, they need to pass the title as well as the content. So how do we get these values from the user? So we'll go under the VS Code. Let's first get the try catch block. So let's say we'd like to grab the title, reach all the structure, let's say title and content. This is going to be coming from request.body. But if you try to say console log the title and the body, by default, this would be undefined. So to be able to use this, and this should be content, by the way. Okay, so by default, you cannot access this value. If you want to access them, you need to head over to server.js, and just before your routes, you would say app.use express.json, which is a middleware that we add. So let's say middleware. Now we'll talk about the middleware in detail. For now, just know that this is something needed. Let's try to use it, and then I'll explain this on a diagram, I promise. Okay, so just make sure to add it before your routes. Now let's try to get these values where we'd like to create a node. I'll say const let's say new node, and this is going to be our new node. We'll call the model, where we'd like to add the title. Let's say it'll be equal to this, and then the content will be equal to the content that user passes. Since the key and value is the same thing, we can shorten this. And then let's try to save it to the database. So we just created it. We'll say await new node dot save. And then we can send the response. Let's say status is going to be equal to 201. Again, this is something that we have talked about previously. The response could be, let's say, I'll just add the message for now. Let's say node created successfully. And for the catch block, I'll do the exact same thing. So I'll copy paste, let's say error in create node controller. Okay, let's try to see this in action. We would like to send a post request, right? If you take a look at it, it is the post request. So let's go under the postman. I'll say post. Now we would like to send some body. Let's select this and just say it'll be row, then JSON. Okay, so just try to type this out with me. We'll have the title, let's say my first node. And then for the content, I'll say some content. Okay, let's try to send the request. Node created successfully. We got the status code. Let's take a look at the database if this is the case, right? Let's just double check. Okay, so we got the database name, which is the nodes_db. Then we got the collection where we have our very first document. And as you can tell, the MongoDB has added these timestamps by default, and it also adds an underscore ID field by default, right? So you don't really need to add an ID by yourself. And I have said in the past that I'll show you this nodes_db. Now this is coming from it is coming from right here, right? I said this would be your database name. If you don't put anything here, this would be called as test. Okay, so just keep this in mind. So now that we have created a node, if we send a request to here, and by the way, let's fix this, we should be able to get all the nodes that we have. So I'll go here, send the get request. Okay, so we just have only one node. This is the response that we got. Now let's try to create another node. So here I'll just go into this one. Let's say my second node, and let's say some content 1, 2, 3. Instead of getting this message, we can maybe show the created node. So for this, I'll go into VS Code. Okay, so instead of sending this message, first I'll say this is going to be called as node. Let's say node.save, which is going to give us, let's say, the saved node. And we can return this as the response. So I'll just say return the saved node. Okay, so this is something optional, but I think now this should be a little bit more clean. Let's say my third node and add some content. Okay, so this is what we got. Instead of that message, we actually see the created node. Now, how do I update a node? So let's say I want to update this one where I'd like to update the content. So I would create a put request. Here, what it says, sign up to save your work remotely. We don't really want to do it. Let's say I'll get this as the put request. So instead of this content, let's say I'll have the updated content. And I'll just leave the title as it is so I can delete that. Now, if I want to update this one, I need to get the ID and put it into the URL, right? So API nodes, and this is the one that I'd like to update. And this is how we set that up. Here we can see we are expecting a put request to this API nodes / whatever the ID is. And then we will run this method. So let's try to build it. I'll say try and catch block, where we'd like to get the title as well as the content from the request.body. So I'll say request.body. This will give us some data, which is going to be title as well as the content. And then we'll say await, let's say node.findById and update. Now we need to pass the ID. here you can tell it says the very first thing that you need to pass will be the ID. But how do we get the ID from the URL, right? How do we know this is the ID that user sends us? So we can say something like request.params.id. So we call this as ID because this is what we called it. Here, if you said hello, then you should say request.params.hello, right? So these names should match. Now that we have this in mind, the first thing that we need to pass is the ID so that we know which node that we are updating and then the fields that we would like to update. So we'll say update the title as well as the content. So let's say title, just pass this and pass the content itself. Now let's say res.json. Once this is done successfully, we can say res.status. Let's say 200, it is success. And for the JSON, we can say message node updated successfully. And in the catch, I'll go ahead, copy this, paste it. Let's say error in update node controller. Okay, let's try to save and give it a go. I'll go ahead, add this put method. Now we didn't really pass the title. Let's see what'll happen. Or maybe first, let's try to add the title. I'll not change the title. Let's add a comma right here. Send the request. Node updated successfully. Let's take a look at the database. I'll just try to refresh. Let me zoom out. So we got 3 different documents and the third one has been updated. This is the content that we have. Now what happens if user puts an ID that does not exist? So in this case, let's try to handle it. Here, just before we send the response, here I'll say const updated node. Now I'll say if updated node is not found, right? Let's say updated node, if this is equal to a falsy value, we would like to say return out of this function with the status code of 404, which means not found. And then I'll say JSON, we can send a message such as node not found. And there is one more thing. Once you update something, at the end, you would like to add this option called new equal to true. Now this is optional, but let's save. And if you hover over this, just read it out loud, you will understand what that does. Basically, I'll try to summarize it. Once you add this, it'll give you the new node with the updated fields. I hope that makes sense. And then now let's try to save and send the request with an invalid ID. So this is the previous one. Now let's put 45, which is something that we don't have in the database. Okay, node not found. We got 404. Nothing has been updated in the database. Let's bring this back. Let's say updated content 123. Since we have the node, we can update it successfully. And instead of returning this message, I will send the updated node in the response. Okay, so I'll try to update it once again to this content. Okay, so this is the response that we got. Now you might be asking, do I have to add the title as well as the content? So let's try to delete one of them. So I just deleted the title. I'll say updated content 123, send the request. Now, as you can tell, title has not changed. This is what we had previously. Let's try to refresh the database and take a look at the title as well as the content. So it'll only update what you have passed. In this case, we only passed the content, so it has been updated only. Okay, then we are going to add the very last controller where we can delete it. So maybe you can pause the video and try to build it by yourself. It'll be similar to this one that we have built. For the method, we have something like find by ID and delete. Okay, so just pause the video and try to do so. Then we can watch my solution. So I will say await node.find by ID and delete. How do we know which node we would like to delete? Where we can get, well, we can get the ID from the URL. So here I'll say request.params.id. And then this would give us the deleted node. Let's say deleted node. We can check for it. just like what we have done here. I'll say if there is not deleted node, that means node not found. User put an invalid ID. We can return this response, but else we can say res.json. You can either return this one or a message such as node deleted successfully. And if you don't send a status, by default it'll be 200. So let's try to see this in action. In the catch, we can copy and paste this one. It's pretty classic. We'll just say error and delete node controller. Okay, so let's try to delete the third node. I'll get the ID, send the delete request. We don't really need to send a body. I'll say none. Send the request. It has been deleted successfully. And here we can see we got the 200 by default, even if we didn't pass it. But I think it's fine to just put this explicitly, right? So I'll just put it as a 200 right here in my code just to be consistent. Okay, so I just saved the file and we have built every single controller that we would need. But I'd like to add one more where we can just fetch a specific node. So we have a get method where we can get all the nodes, but here I'll duplicate this and I'll add the ID. Let's say user wants to fetch a specific node. So here I'll say get node by ID. Let's try to create this controller. I'll copy the name. Right after this one, we can say export async function. Put the name where we can get the request and response. And here let's try to import it. Okay, now let's try to build it. It'll be really simple as well. All we want to do, just get the ID from the URL and fetch that node specifically. So here I'll say const node await node.find by ID, which is going to be this one. And then we'll say if we don't have the node, we can return res.status of 404. I'll say JSON is going to be equal to message of node not found. But in the else case, we can say res.json, just return the node itself. In the catch, it'll be classic. Now there is even a better way of handling the catch blocks. So you don't really put the try and catch. Instead, you would create some kind of a wrapper function, but it's a little bit more advanced. So I'll just skip that in this tutorial. Okay, so for now, it's completely fine to use these try and catch blocks. There is nothing wrong with it. I'll put this console.error and let's try to see this in action. Let's say I'll get every single node, but now let's say I want to get my first node specifically. I'll copy this ID. Let's create a get method. Here maybe I'll just update my URL. Okay, so instead of getting every single one of them, I'll get this one specifically. Here we go. We only have this as the response. Now, normally we can end the section right here, but there is one more thing that I'd like to mention. So when we send the request where we get every single node, we can sort this, right? So first we get the first one and then the second one. But how can we reverse it so that we can see the latest one at the beginning? So we can go under the controller. Once we say just find all of them, right after this we can say dot sort and then sort them depending on the create that field. So I'll say created. Let's try to type this out correctly. Created, and I'll say -1, which means show the newest first. Okay, by default I think it is 1, but let's try to go with -1. So previously we got the first one and then the second one. Okay, so again we got the same thing. Let's say 1. What are we gonna get? Oops. Okay, do I have a typo? Okay, it should be created at. Let's put -1. Sorry, my bad. So that's why it did not work. This is what we got by default, but if we have -1, we should get the second one at the beginning and then the first one. Okay. By default, it is 1. Let's try to see. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind. I'll be using -1 so that in the end result, when we create a new node, I'd like to see this at the beginning, right? So this is the latest one created, and this is the first one that has been created. If you wanted to, you can change the behavior, but this is what I'll have in my implementation. Okay, so I have also updated this comment so that you can have it in the source code. Now, one more thing. If you are not using a variable, just like this one, this is the argument, the request, we declared it, but the value is never read. So what you can do is skip them by adding an underscore. This is one of the conventions that we have. So this is something that you can keep in mind. Okay, so I think that's gonna be it for the entire section where we have built every single controller that we would need. Now in the server.js, we talked about the middlewares, and I said we'll get into the details, but that will be in the next section. So for now, just know that we have added this middleware, which is a function basically. It allows us to get access to the request.body. Let me find it. Okay, so it allows us to get access these values that we send as a JSON, right? So when we send the post request, we have added these fields. By default, you cannot access them. They'll give you undefined. But just because we have added before our routes, we are able to use these values. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. That's gonna be it for this section. I'll see you in the next one. Alright, so this is where we left. Now in this section, we'll talk about the middleware as well as the rate limiting. Now these are the concepts that sounds really complicated and confusing for beginners, but I'll try to simplify it as much as possible. So hopefully at the end of this video, you will have no questions about these terms and concepts. Okay, so let's get started with the middleware. I have some notes that we can take a look at. Now the middleware name sounds really complicated and horrendous, but let's see what that is. Now basically, it is just a function that runs in the middle between the request and response. So what does that mean? So you can send a request from the client, right? And you will get a response back from the server. Just before you send the response, you can do something in the middle, right? And this is where the middleware comes into play. Just before you send the response, you can do something. And let's do something really simple. So let's say we send a request. Just before we send the response back, we can put a console log in the terminal, right? So let's try to do so. Okay, so right here, just before the nodes route, I'll go ahead and say app.use, and you would use this use method to be able to add a middleware, right? So I'll go ahead and say we'll get the callback function. Now, just like previously, we will get access to request, response, and also what we call the next function. Okay, so let's try to see it. I'll say console log, we just got a new request. Okay, so once we console log it, we can call the next function. Now, what does that mean? Let's say we send a request to this endpoint. Now, this function would run, right, get all nodes, because we are trying to get every single node. Okay, so we will first put the console log and then call the next function, which is this one. I hope that makes sense. Just pause the video, try to think about it. It should make sense. Now let's open up the terminal and try to send a request. I'll send the request. Just before we send the response, we should be able to see this in the terminal. Here we go. And then we will send the response within this function, right? Now you can even add more, let's say, more meaningful things. I'll put backticks. Let's say request method is, and let's put the request.method. And let's say request URL is in the exact same way. I'll say request.url. Let's do it once again. Send the request. And in the terminal, method was get and URL is /API/nodes. So this is how easy to understand the middleware. Now, if you think about it, this is exactly what we have just explained. Just before you send a response back, here, this one says, go ahead and get access to request.body, right? So you can get these fields just because you have added this middleware. If you delete this and send a request, this would be equal to undefined. You can console log it, but I'll just skip that. Okay, so I think we just understand the middleware, what that does. I'll put a comment. Let's say this middleware will parse the JSON bodies. Basically, it'll allow you to get access to request.body. And then this is our simple, let's say, our simple custom middleware. If you wanted to, you can delete it from the code. I'll just go ahead and comment this and leave it in the source code. Now, let me go back to my diagrams and talk about some use cases for the middleware. So one of the most popular use case would be the authentication check. So I'll say auth check. So let's say you sent a request. Let's say you are on Instagram. You sent a request to create a post. But if you are not authenticated, server will check it with the middleware function, right? Just before it sends you a response, it'll check if this user is authenticated. If user is authenticated, they can create the post, but if not, they cannot, right? So this is a perfect use case for the middleware. Or let's say the rate limiting. This is something that we'll talk about, and let's do it immediately now. So again, it sounds really complicated, but it's actually pretty simple, a pretty simple concept to understand, and I think it's really important for a junior to understand it in the first place. So I have an explanation. Let's read it out loud and then we'll see some examples. So rate limiting is a way to control how often someone can do something on a website or on an application, like how many times they can refresh a page, make a request to an API, or try to log in. Now, what does that mean? Let's say you're a malicious user, right? And nonstop you would send a request to this /API/notes. Okay, so let's say we are trying to abuse this API. Imagine I am just sending GET request nonstop, and at some point, like this server might crash, right? It cannot handle this overload. And imagine we are doing this like 10 friends, right? At some point, the application will crash. Even if it doesn't crash, like we are just overloading their servers. So what we can do to block this, we can add the rate limiting. So we'll do something like you can only send 100 requests per user every 15 minutes, right? Instead of sending infinite amount of requests, we'll add a rate limiter before the API, right, in front of it. This will be the middleware that we'll have. And if they exceed this limit, we will say, you just rate limited, you have sent too many requests. Okay, so I think we have already talked about this, but the status code is 429, which means too many requests, and rate limiting helps with preventing abuse and protecting servers from getting overwhelmed. Okay, so I hope everything makes sense. So this is the concept that you should understand. Now let's try to understand how can we implement this. So for this, we'll be using Upstash. You can find the link in the description. I'll go ahead and log in. So I already have an account. It's completely free to get started with. So they have a free plan that is really generous. Okay, let's try to log in. They have a bunch of different services. By the way, we'll be using the Redis with rate limiting. And to put it simple, Redis is the key value store, which will act like a storage. So for now, just think it like a database, which actually is. It's like a NoSQL database, but instead of collections, it is not like MongoDB. We have key value pairs. So we'll see this in action. Just go ahead and log in. I have already logged in, so let's create a database. For the name, we can say think board, because why not? The primary region will be the closest one to me. You can select any of these. I'll go with this one, and I'll just leave everything as it is. Okay, so let's say next, free plan, right? We don't really need to pay anything to get started with. This will create a database for us. Now we would like to connect from our Node.js application, right? And they have these documentation like the SDK. So we'll be using in this way. First, let's get our environment variables. So I'll copy this. the name will be upstash redis rest URL. Let's first copy it, go under the .env file, and then we would like to get the value. So just go ahead, copy that, paste this in, and then get the token. I think I first should get the key. Okay, come on, that was the, I think, value. I'd like to copy this name. Okay, so I just got the keys and values for my environment variables. So let's save this file. To be able to implement rate limiting, we need to install a package. I'll go under the backend, clear my terminal, and get these packages. So I'll say npm install, let's say at upstash /rate limit, and let's use a specific version. I'll say 2.0.5, and we'd like to install upstash, let's say /redis at 1.34.9. Okay, so we'll be using them just in a second. It's been installed. Let's go and run the app. I'll go under the config. We would like to configure the upstash. So I'll say upstash.js. It'll be only 10 lines of code. So let's get the imports. I'll say import the rate limit. And this is coming from the documentation, by the way. You can double check that. Let's say import this from upstash rate limit, and I'll duplicate this. We'll get something from the Redis, which is going to be equal to Redis. Okay, now let's go ahead, type this out. I'll say create a rate limit object. So let's say new rate limit, and it is really simple. All we have to do, pass the Redis where we would like to read it from the environment variables. So I'll say Redis dot from environment, and then the limiter. Now, what do you want to happen, right? In my case, I'll just put a comment. I'll say I want to create a rate limiter. Let's type this out. That allows 10 requests per, let's say, 20 seconds. Okay, so this is really low, but this is just for testing purposes. Let's say I want to allow, I want to have 10 requests per 20 seconds. So this is how we can implement that. I'll say rate limit. We can use the sliding window, and I'll say 10 requests in 20 seconds. Okay, 20 space and then S, which stands for seconds. And then we can say export default this rate limit. Now, to be able to access environment variables, we need to import the .env. So I'll say import .env from this package. So import the package and then call the config method. So we have created an instance and we are exporting it. Now it is time to use it. So again, let's use some best practices where we would like to create the middleware folder. This is the folder that we can add our custom middlewares, right? So the one that I'd like to create will be rate limiter.js file. So here in this file, we will create a function. Let's say const rate limiter, and I'd like to capitalize this one. Let's say it'll be an async function where we'll get the request. Oops, let's say request, get the response as well as the next, because since this is a middleware, we will do some checks, right? Once it is done, we'll call the next function, just like what we have done in the past. So let's try to say, just export it first. Okay, so let's say this will be an arrow function, by the way. Just before we send a response back, we can call our middleware. So here I'll say app.use this middleware that we have. Just make sure that you have imported. Okay, so this will check for the rate limiting, if user can send requests, or should we return an error response. So here let's try to implement that. First, I'll get the rate limit that we have created under the config upstash.js file. So we'll be using this. First, let's say try and catch. In the catch, or let's get started with the try. Why did we skip to the catch? So first we can get the success case, right? I'll say const, is this done successfully or not? Say await rate limit dot limit. Now you would put the identifier. Now this would normally, like, this can be the user ID, but in our case, we don't really have authentication. So we can put a string like my limit key. So I'll explain this in a second. For now, let's say if it is not success, right? If we got an error, then we can say return res.status of 429, which means too many requests. Let's say .json, and we can send the message. Say too many requests. Please try again later. But if this is not the case, if they have not been rate limited, we'd like to just call the next function, right? That means the application will run as expected. But if we have some other errors that is related to, I don't know, maybe Upstash or our server, we can just put console.log, let's say rate limit error, and put the error. Then we can call the next function as well. We can even add the error within that. Okay, so let's save and try to give it a go. I'd like to even decrement this under the rate limit. So let's say we only allow 10 requests in 10 seconds, right? Or let's just say even 5. I'll go ahead and spam this. So I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, once we hit that rate limit, we will get this status code and then the message, so we cannot send requests. So you can take a look at the database, go under the data browser. So here we can see we got 5 requests and it has time to live. Now we just put it as 10 seconds. Let's put it like 60 seconds and try to do it once again. I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now the 6th request is going to fail because we sent too many requests. And if you take a look at this, let's refresh. So we have 5 requests. We have sent 5 requests and it has still 1 minute until this is completed. So this is how easy it is to implement rate limiting with Upstash. Now I'd like to change these values. I'll say 10 to 20 seconds. Okay, so that was just testing purposes. And this is still like too, let's say it is too less. Let's try to increment that. I'll say maybe 100 requests in every 1 minute. And I have also updated the comment. Now, if you take a look at this key, it is called as my limit key. And like you should be able to see it right here, right? Now, normally, as I said, if you have authentication in your application, you would put the user ID. So you would say rate limit the user with their user ID. So with this, every user will be rate limited specifically. So if I send 100 requests and get rate limited, you should not be rate limited, right? It is done per user, right? If John gets rate limited, it should not affect Jane. But unfortunately, we cannot implement it in this way because we don't really have authentication, so we cannot get access to user ID. Another way of doing it, you would add rate limit depending on the IP address. The implementation would change a little bit, but for now, I'd like to keep it simple. Give you the idea and go with this implementation. I'll say my rate limit. Okay, so with this implementation, if a user sends 100 requests per minute, everyone would be blocked, right? In total, once we hit 100 requests per minute, our application will break. So once again, most of the time you would like to put this in identifier like user ID or IP address. In this case, we will keep it simple. My goal is to teach you the rate limiting concept and how to implement it. All you have to do is just write 20 lines of code for the rate limiting and then create an instance with 10 lines of code. So that's all you need to do to implement rate limiting, and then just add it before your routes, right? We have this comment. I'm not really sure if I should delete that or not, but I'll just leave it right here. Okay, so that's gonna be it for this entire section. Now I'd like to talk about something else just before we end this section. Now, here we are calling the connectDB method, and before it connects to the database, we are starting our application, right? So here we can see, I'll just kill the backend, run this again. First, application starts, and then we are connecting to database, which is something I wouldn't really recommend that much. So I think the better way would be first connect to database and then start listening. So how can we do it? I'll cut this. Let's say, I'll just put it right here. Let's say connectDB. Once we connect it, we can say .then, go ahead, run this function where we can wrap it with this function, right? So once database connected, only then go ahead, listen. Let's see. So MongoDB connected, and then we are starting to listen on this port. Now this is a tiny detail. In most of the tutorials, you might see people do this, where they just put the connectDB at the very top. So right here, and this would be at the very bottom of this file, which is completely fine for tutorial purposes, but I think in production grade applications, it should be looking like this. Let me just bring this back. I'll do Control Z. Once the database connected, and then your application should start. Because if you think about it, if your database, the connection, if it fails, what is the point of starting the app, right? So that's why we say once it is done successfully, only then go ahead, run the application. So this is a small optimization that I'll just add at the very end of this section. So with that, that's kind of it. I think we have built the entire server, right? The entire API. In the next section, we can get started with the front end. So I'll see you in the next section. Alright, so let's get started with our front end application. Now I'll go ahead and open up my terminal. I already have the backend up and running, so there is no need to delete that. I'll leave it as open. Let's create a new one and cd into the front end. So I'll just press F and then tab. It should be auto-completed. Okay, so let's try to create a React application using Vite. I'll say npm create Vite at latest, and I want to initialize it under the current folder, which is front end. So I'll just put dot at the end. Let's go ahead and run this. We will get a couple of different questions where we would like to go with React and JavaScript. Okay, so we got all the files and folders that we would need. First, we need to run npm install. So this will get all the dependencies that we would need, and then we can run the app with npm run dev. Okay, so let's clear the terminal and say npm run dev. And let's try to visit that. Here we go. This is the boilerplate React application that we just got. Okay, so let's first set up the pages. Now, what does that mean? In our application, we'll have 3 different pages. The home page, the detail page. So let's say you click to this one, right? It'll take you to the detail page, and then we have the create page. So to be able to create those, we'll use React Router. I'll kill the front end, and I'll say npm install React-Router. Now, in the past, this was called as React Router DOM. You can still install it, but in the latest version, it is called React Router. And this is the one that we'll be using. So just go ahead and type this out and install it. Now, another package that we'll be using for notifications will be React Hot Toast. So install this one as well. And if you have never used it, I'll try to show you that. So let's first say npm run dev. And let's go under the source, under the main. First, let's delete the app.css. We don't really need it. Just delete everything in the index.css. Delete everything under the app.jsx. Delete everything under the assets. Okay, so first I'll just say RESTful, which will give me this snippet. If this doesn't work, that means you don't really have this extension, which is this one. Just go ahead and install it. Once you have done this, you can do RESTful. Okay, so let's say this is our app. Now under the main.jsx, we will wrap our application with the browser router. And we will import this from React Router. Okay, now that means in our entire application, we can use the routing, right? We just wrapped our entire app with the browser router. Now we can go under the app and create our pages. So first I'll create the pages folder. Let's say we'll have the homepage.jsx and get this boilerplate code for now. Let's try to copy this, paste it twice. So we'll have the create page .jsx and the content is going to be again REFCE, and then let's say node detail page. Okay, so this is going to be the content. Now let's go under the app.jsx and try to add these routes. So here I'll delete the content. Let's say we would like to return some routes. Again, this is going to be coming from React Router. Then we can add our routes. So let's say route, import it. Let's say if we visit this path, which is the home page, we would like to return this element, which is going to be the home page. Let's try to self-close this and we can import it. Let's say import homepage from under the pages from this page, from this file. Let's try to duplicate it. If we visit /create, we would like to see the create page that we can import. And then finally, we will have the node detail page. Let's paste this in. I'll duplicate this one. Let's say /node/some ID. This is going to be dynamic. So let's put colon and then ID, where we would like to return this page. Okay, let's save and give it a go. If we visit the home page, this is what we're going to get. If we visit /create, we'll get the create page and let's say node and some ID. This is what we are going to get. Okay, so now that we have our pages working correctly, we would like to set up React Hot Toast, which is the notification library that we can use. So this is the kind of output that we're going to get if something done successfully, or if we have some errors, we can show this one, right? There are a bunch of different variations, but we'll mostly be using the success and error cases. So first we need to install the package. We already done this. So let's put the toaster in our application. So you can put it under the app.jsx, or in this case, I'll put it under the main.jsx. Let's try to import it from React Hot Toast. So I'll say import the toaster from React Hot Toast. And now let's try to add a test button so that we can just test this out. I'll say click me. If we click to it, I'll say on click. Just go ahead, run this function. Let's say toast and import it from React Hot Toast, just like this. I'll say success. Let's say congrats. Okay, let's give it a go. I'll go ahead, click to it. It works as expected. If you want to get some errors, you can put toast.error, and this should be the output. Alright, so now that this is working as expected, we can go ahead and set up a Tailwind. Now, if you have never used Tailwind CSS, in my opinion, it is the best way of writing CSS, and this is basically how that works. We have a bunch of different CSS classes, the utility classes, and instead of creating them under the CSS file, we just put it directly into the JSX. So you would just put it directly into the HTML elements. So just like this. So that means we don't really need to create our styles under a CSS file, which is really convenient. So let's go ahead and see how we can get started with it. So the version 4 just came out, and I think it is kind of not stable. It's really buggy. So what I'd like to do is use the version 3. And this is something that you'll see all over the internet at the moment. Every single tutorial is still using this one, even in my past tutorials. So that's the reason that I'll go with the version 3, completely up to date. It's not outdated, like absolutely fine. Okay, don't ever feel this video is outdated. Not at all. So just go ahead, select the version 3, and then under the documentation, we would like to get started with the framework guides, specifically with Vite. Okay, so we already created a React application. So instead, we would like to install the dependencies. So I'll copy this, go under my terminal, under the front end. Let's kill this. I'll just paste this in. So this will give you the tailwind config.js file. Let's see. So we just got this. You would like to delete the entire content and instead get this one from the documentation. Paste this in, save, and finally you will update the index.css file. So copy it and you should be good to go. Paste this in. Okay, let's try to test this out. I'll add, first let me start the app. I'll say npm run dev. So I'll add some classes on this button. Let's say class or class name. Text is going to be red 500. Let's say heading will be 4 from all directions. UI should be updated. Here we go. Let's add a background color as well. I'll say BG, I don't know, let's say pink of something like 300. Okay, so these are the classes coming from Tailwind CSS. Now, if you are not able to see this highlight or this auto completion when you type out, that means you don't really have this extension called Tailwind IntelliSense. So let's see. Okay, it is this one. Just go ahead and install it. You should be good to go, just like what I have. Now, we don't really need this button. We would like to delete it. That was just for testing purposes. Okay. So now we got the Tailwind set up as well. The very last thing that I'd like to set up is going to be the Daisy UI. Now let's visit daisyui.com. So head over to daisyui.com. This is the Tailwind CSS library that we have. Let's just try to scroll down and see this example. Now, to be able to get this button, you need to write all these CSS classes without using Daisy UI. But if you use Daisy UI, all you have to do is just add a button class. You would get even a better button, right? So this button looks a lot more cleaner than the previous one, but the thing is, you don't really need to type all these classes, right? And another example would be this. So if you just use Tailwind only, you need to write all these classes to get this output. But if you use Daisy UI with it, this is all you have to add. Some cards, labels, inputs, these are the class names, and you would get the exact same output, okay? And they have a bunch of different themes, like they have forest, aqua, lofi, pastel, anything that you can check out. In this tutorial, we'll be using the forest, but first let's go ahead and set this up. Okay, so this is the beauty of Daisy UI. It'll make everything super fast. Now, we'll not be using version 5. Once again, this just came out. We would like to use a little bit more stable version. Again, this is completely up to date. Nothing is outdated. So let's say how to use. Instead of getting the latest version, we will get 4.12.24. Okay, so let's try to type this out. I'll open up my terminal. Let's say npm install daisy UI-d, but here we would like to add 4.12.24. Okay, so it should be installed. Now let's see what is the next step. They say put the import under the tailwind config.js. So I'll go under the tailwind config.js. Under the plugins, we can just say Daisy UI and import it above. So it is the exact same thing as doing require, but we are using the import syntax. Okay, I think we should be good to go. Let's try to kill our application and run this again. Now we can get classes from Daisy UI. So I'll just say create a button. Let's say click me. And for the class, I can use btn and let's say btn outline. Okay, let's try to test this out. So here we can see the entire theme has changed. If in your case this is white, if this is a light mode, that's completely fine. We are going to fix it. Now this is the outline. We can have btn primary. So this is how that would look. And basically, we have a bunch of different components. So we can go under the documentation, and under the components, we have different buttons. So let's try to copy every one of them. Since we are using JSX, I'll select this one, copy and paste this in. And this is the output that we got, right? And again, they have a bunch of different components that we'll be using in this tutorial. So they have like built-in really cool components that you don't really need to type anything. Just go ahead, copy and paste. Super easy to get started with, and it's really cool for prototyping. Alright, so just before we end this section, we would like to use this green theme that we have in the demo application, right? This is the forest theme that we'll be using. Now, how can you use a theme coming from Daisy UI? So we have this themes section, and these are all the themes that they have under the version 4. We would like to use this one, and if you take a look at the documentation, you need to visit Tailwind config and add your theme under the themes. So let's try to do it. I'll go under the Tailwind config. Right after the plugins, I'll say create the Daisy UI. This is the object under the themes. Let's say themes. You would have this array where you would like to put every single theme. Let's say you would like to use the light theme, the dark one, and the forest. Okay, so if you want to use all of them, you can put it right here, but in this case, I'll be using forest only, so I'll just leave it right here. If you wanted to, you can delete them as well. And then you would visit the, let's say, app.jsx. Here, you would say data-theme is going to be equal to forest. Let's save and take a look at it. Hopefully, it should be working out. Okay, so this is the theme that we have for forest. Let's say you want to use the coffee theme. Let's go right here, include that one as well. Now you would say, I would like to use the coffee theme in my app. So now everything will change to this coffee theme, right? So this is such a beautiful feature that you get out of the box, right? It's like unbelievable. I would like to go visit VS Code, and as I said, we'll be using the forest theme. If you would like to, you can use anything that you wish, right? You can use something else, but this is what I'll have, so I'll just simplify this array. Okay, so believe it or not, that's gonna be it for the entire setup. Let's try to quickly go over it. We have built a React application using Vite. We have set it up the browser router, which is the React router, right? As well as the React hot toast. We just put them right here, and then we created our pages. We have set it up the Tailwind as well as a Daisy UI. So let's delete them, by the way. So we have all of our pages, everything working correctly as expected. So in the next section, we will get started with the actual features. Alright, so let's move on with the homepage. This is the output that we are trying to build. So first, let's get started with the navbar component, where we have the logo on the left and we have this link on the right hand side. Once we click to it, it'll take us to the create page. Now, as you can tell in our application, we are using a lot of different icons, right? Such as this one, and that one. For this, we'll be using a package. So let's go ahead and install it. Under the front end, I'll just kill this. Let's say npm install lucid-react. Go ahead and install it. And also, I'd like to install the Axios package so that we can replace our fetch API with the Axios. So let's go ahead and install that. I'll explain once we use it. Let's run our app with npm run dev and get into the homepage.jsx file. So I will create the components folder as well. The first component that we'll have will be navbar.jsx. Okay, so let's get started with the homepage. First, I'll have the class name. Let's say minimum height will be screen. So this will take the entire screen. The first thing we'll like to see will be the navbar component. Let's import it and let's get into it. Now, this will not contain any logic at all. It is just UI only. So let's say this will be the header component where we can have the div within this. And let's add some classes. So I'll say the background will be base 300. We'll add the border bottom, so border -b, and I'll say border color is going to be base content, and I'd like to update the opacity. I'll just say 10. Okay, now let's save. We got this formatting. We'll go into the div. Let's say class name is going to be mx auto, maximum width of 6x large. Now, if you have never used a Tailwind previously, this might look a little bit weird. You might be asking, how do you memorize all of them? How do I learn all of them? So honestly, as you write more and more, you just get comfortable with it, right? And most of the time, nowadays we have AI. You can use AI to create UIs. But most of the time, once you just get started with it, once you build a couple of different applications, it gets really easy to write Tailwind CSS, because like you learn all these classes, right? You know how to set up a maximum width with all these classes. Like you have from x large until I think 7x large, right? Okay, so all I'm trying to say, you just learn these as you build more projects with the Tailwind CSS. Now we can add padding x of 4, which is around 16 pixels, right? And then we can add padding y of 4 as well. If you say padding and 4, this will add it from all directions, right? But we only want to add it from x direction and y direction, which means from all directions. So I'll delete this and I'll say padding of 4. This is the exact same thing. Alright, so after this one, I'll create one more div. Let's say this is going to be flex, items will be centered, and then justify will be between. So we'll have the logo on the left hand side and the button on the right hand side, right? So the justify will be between, so that we can have this space between. Alright, now on the left hand side, we'll have the h1, which is our logo. Let's say it'll be think board. For the classes, let's say text will be 3x large, which is around these values basically. Let's say font, bold, text will be primary. And then you would put font dash mono, let's say tracking tight. So we have tight, tighter, or tightest. I hope I pronounced this correctly. So we have tighter. Do we have tightest? I think we don't. These are the ones that we have. And this is used for letter spacing. And this is the value that I'll be using. Let's say it'll be tight. Okay, let's try to see the output. This is how that look at the moment. Now let's try to build the right hand side. First, I'll have my div, let's say class name, flex, item centered, and gap of 4. So first we would like to have the link. Let's say import the link from React Router. When we click to it, it should take us to /create, and we can add the class name of btn and btn-primary. And then we can go ahead and add the plus icon within this. So let's say plus icon, which will be imported from Lucid React. Okay, so I just imported that. Now let's say class name is going to be height of 5 and width of 5. Now if height and width is the same value, we can say size of 5. It's the exact same thing. And then we can add the span that says new node. Okay, let's save and take a look at the output. This is what we got. Do I have a typo? It should be on the link btn primary, not bnt. Now it should be updated, and once I click to it, it'll take me to the create page. So that's gonna be it for the navbar component. We can go under the home page and try to build the rest of it. Now in the home page, when we send a lot of requests, once we got rate limited, we would like to see this kind of a UI. So imagine you have rate limited, the application will say rate limit reached, please just wait a little bit and then try once again, right? So this is the component that we would like to build. Again, it doesn't contain any logic, it just has the UI elements. So let's go ahead and try to build it. I will go under the components. I'll say rate limited UI.jsx, and here I'll create a state. Let's say use state. Let's say by default this is going to be false, and here I'd like to say rate limited and set rate limited. Okay, so basically after the navbar, I'll say if we are rate limited, and let's even say is rate limited, so we can understand this is a boolean. Okay, so I'll say if is rate limited, just go ahead and return this component. Now, once again, this component doesn't contain any logic at all. So instead of typing this out, I'll go ahead from the source code, copy and paste, and you can get this code under the components under the rate limited UI.jsx. So just go ahead, find this file and copy the entire content, paste this in. It is 20 lines of code, no logic at all, just some markup and Tailwind CSS classes. Okay, let's try to save. Here I'll say this will be true by default, so that we can see it in UI. Okay, so this is the output that we have. Now, please don't get mad just because we copied and pasted. This course is not about Tailwind CSS, and these are some really basic CSS classes. So that's why I'd like to skip this session where we just copy and paste the UI. Okay, now we'll go under the home page, and maybe we can actually try to fetch the nodes, right? So I'll create a state, let's say nodes and set nodes. By default, this will be an empty array. So let's say use state of an empty array. And then to keep track of the loading state, we can have loading and set loading. Let's say initially it's going to be use state of true, because as soon as we visit the home page, we will try to fetch the nodes, right? So we can say the loading state is going to be true. And then to be able to fetch that, we can create the use effect. Let's import it and initialize it. So at this point, I assume you know the basics of use effect as well as React itself, right? We have states, we have use effects, and we have JSX. So that's it. That's all you have to know to be able to follow along. So in the use effect, I will create a function, let's say const fetch nodes or get nodes. So this will be an arrow function. At the end of the day, we would like to call this function. Now let's try to define the logic. So here I'll first create the try and catch block. Now instead of using the fetch API, this is how you would do it if you would use fetch API. Let's try to do it. I'll say await fetch, and then you would put the URL. So let's say http localhost is 5001/API/nodes. If we send a GET request to this, we can get all the nodes, right? I'll say const data, let's say await res.json. And then we can just say console log the data, right? Let's do it with the fetch, and then we will change this code using Axios. Let's say console.log error fetching nodes. Okay, let's try to see this in action in the terminal. So I'll open up my terminal. Okay, so first we got the course error. This is nothing related to fetch. This is a different error that we are going to take a look at. But basically, all I am trying to say is that if you were to use fetch, this is how you would do it. But if you were to use Axios, you don't really need to add this step, right? You would say just Axios, let's try to import it, and then we'll say .get. This is our get method. If you want to send a post method, you would say Axios.post, so on and so forth, right? Now let's try to import it. Okay, instead of data, you would say res.data. So this is a lot more comfortable than fetch API. That's why we'll be using it. Now we have the course error, which is something that we need to take a look at. So let's save this file and go over our nodes that we have. So course stands for cross-origin resource sharing. Now what does that mean? Basically, course is a browser security rule. So this has been added by default. That's why we got these errors. Now let's try to see how we can fix it, or what is the problem in the first place. So when a website tries to get data from another website, like your frontend calling an API on a different domain, the browser might block it for security reasons. And this is exactly what's happening, right? This is exactly what is happening at the moment. And here's an example. Let's go over it, then we'll fix it. So let's say you have a frontend at localhost 3000, and you have an API backend at api.example.com. So your frontend makes a fetch request to get data from this API. So you called it, but you got the course error because browser says you're coming from localhost 3000 and you are trying to access API example.com. That's a different origin. I need to make sure the API allows this, right? First, you need to make sure that API allows this this origin, the front-end origin. And let's see how we can do it right now. I'll go under the backend. So under the server.js, we would like to add a middleware. Now first we need to install a package. So I'll open up a new terminal. Let's say go under the backend. I'll say cd backend, and then I'll say npm install course. So this is the package that we'll be using to be able to get rid of that course error. Okay, so right here I'll just say app.use. We would like to call it the course method, the course package. Let's import it. I'll say import course from course. And by the way, the version that I'm using is 2.8.5. So when you install it, you could say, like just go under the cd backend and say npm install course at 2.8.5 so that we could have the exact same versions. Okay, now I'd like to just format this a little bit. I'll have the package imports at the top. We'll have the route and all the local imports at the bottom. Okay, now with this, it should be good to go. This basically allows every request from every single URL, right? But if you'd like to specifically add your front-end URL, you would add this object and you would add the origin. Let's say it'll be HTTP localhost and 5173, which is our front-end URL. Let's save. I think this should be an array. Is it? So let's leave it as an array. Oops. I think string would also work if you have only one value. So I'll just leave it as a string. Now let's go ahead and try to see this in action. Now I'll refresh. Okay. Currently, we don't really have any errors that is related to course, right? We have a different error that we'll get into in a second. But basically, we don't really have the error that is related to course. If you delete this line, right? Let's just delete this completely. We'll get the course errors. So if you refresh, now you have the course policy error. But now, we don't really have it. We have something else. I don't know what that is. Let's try to see this in action. I think in the backend terminal, we should be able to see it. Okay, so it says title is required. Are we missing any fields under the database? Let's try to see. I don't really know why we encountered this. So we have title content for every single one of them. Okay, so I think I just found the problem. Here, I forgot to change this to be get. It should be get method because we are adding post, but we are not sending the title or the content. Those fields were required. So here we'd like to add the title. Sorry, we should add get. What am I doing? Let's save. Now it should be working out as expected. Let's try to refresh. Okay, so for a split second, we don't have anything, but then we got the console logs where we have these nodes that are coming from the database. So that means we are able to actually call this function successfully. Now, instead of just console logging this data, we would like to update the nodes state, right? I'll go ahead and say set nodes. That will be equal to response.data. And then we would like to say rate limited. Set is rate limited will be false, because if we are able to get the data, that means we are not rate limited. And by default, let's say this will be false. Okay, but in the catch, we are going to check for that state, right? I'll say just put the console log and then say if error dot response dot status, if it is equal to 429, which means rate limited. In this case, we'll say set rate limited will be equal to true. But in the else case, we can just throw a toast. I'll say toast.error. I'll just say failed to load nodes. let's import the toast function. Okay, and then finally, I'll say loading state will be equal to false. So either we fetched it successfully or we got some errors. In either case, finally the loading state will be equal to false, right? Now let's try to update our rate limit. Here I'll go under here. Let's say we would like to have 10 requests per 20 seconds. This is just for testing purposes so that we can see the UI. So by default, we can fetch the nodes, right? I'll send a couple of different requests. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now it should break. Okay, so we got 429, but for some reason UI is not updated. Let's see. I'll go right here under the home page. So I think we didn't hit this if check. First, I'll add the question mark and let's say console.log the error itself so that we can see the status code. I'll send another request. Let's do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so this is the error. Let's see. So we said error.response.status. So I just paused the video and debugged this a little bit, and I have realized that this course configuration should be before the rate limiter. Now, why is that? Because we are trying to send a response back, but we didn't set up the course, right? First, let's set this up. I'll just put it at the very beginning, and then we will add these. Now let's go ahead and test this out. I'll send a request. Let's do it a couple of times until we get rate limited. Okay, now here we can see rate limit reached, and we got this error. Under the response, the status is equal to 429, which means too many requests, right? Okay, so that was something to keep in mind, and I'm glad that we encountered this issue so that we just understand the order of these middlewares are really important. Okay, now we can go under the homepage and actually display the nodes, right? So first I'd like to check for the loading state. Right after this check, I'll put a div. Let's say the class name is going to be maximum width of 7x large, and then let's say mx will be auto so that the content is centered. Let's say padding will be 4 and then margin top of 6. Here I'll say if we are in the loading state, just go ahead and render a loading component. For now, I'll just keep it simple. I'll have a div. Let's close this off. I'll say loading nodes ... right? And then for the class name, I'll say text will be centered, text will be primary, and maybe padding y of 10. So for now, let's say it is true so that we can see the loading state. Okay, this is what we are gonna see. But once we fetch the nodes, we'll say nodes.length if it is greater than 0, and if we are not rate limited. In this case, we would like to return this part where I'll have a div. Now we'll be using grid. So let me just get a div. So we'll be using grid so that we can have this kind of an output. We'll have 3 columns, right? 1, 2, 3, and as the screen gets smaller, it'll be, let's say, 2 columns and then 1 column at a time, right? So let's try to use a grid in this case. I'll have the class name will be grid columns of 1, and then medium screens and above grid columns will be 2, and then larger screens and above grid columns can be 3. So this is how you can use the breakpoints in Tailwind CSS. And I'll say give a gap of 6 between these items. So here I'll say get the nodes, map through it. For every single node, go ahead, return a component. For now, let's just put the div. Let's say have a div. We can just put the node.title as well as the node. Let's say content. Let's take a look at the output. Let's refresh. Okay, so we got the first node and then second node. And these are the exact same thing that we have. Now, instead of this basic UI, we'll create a separate component. So here I'll delete this part. I'll say for every single node, go ahead, return a node card component. Let's make React happy by passing the unique key. I'll say node._id. Then we can pass the node itself as a prop. Okay, let's try to create this under the components. Let's say .jsx and import it in this file. Okay, now we are going to build the UI within this file. So here, instead of returning a div, we'll return a link, because when we click to the node, right? So once you click to it, it'll take you to this page. So that's why we need to add the link. I'll say key, or we don't really need to add a key. Here I'll say the to property, but first we need to import the link. Okay, so I'll just say, first let's grab the node from the props, and then I'll make this to be dynamic. I'll say visit the node page slash, we'll say node._id. And here we are using node because in app.jsx, this is what we have called it, and then /id, right? Okay, then we can add some classes. Here I'll say class name, and instead of typing this out, I'll basically paste this in. Super basic. We just added the card, background color, hover state, some transition, and then the border color, which is this custom value. Okay, within this link, we can have a div with the class name of card-body. Now we'll go create the h3 that will have the node.title. So this is basically what we are building. Right, this entire thing is the node card. This is the border that we have just added, and now it is the title, then the content, created at date, and then these buttons. Okay, so let's try to build it step by step. This h3 will take the class name of card-title, text base content, and that should be it. Now we'll have the p tag that will be node.content. And then I'll just paste the class name right here. So right after this one, we'll create a div where we can have that created at as well as the buttons, right? So I'll say this will be class name of card-actions. Let's say justify between, and items will be centered, margin top of 4. Then I'll have a span that will get the node.created at date. And then class name is going to be text-small, let's say text base content, and update the opacity. And right after this span, I'll have a div. Let's say class name will be flex, item centered, and gap is going to be 1. Let's make sure this is correct. And then I'll have this icon. Let me import it from Lucid React. It is pen square icon. Next to it, we'll have the button. Let's put this in. I'll say this button will delete the node itself, right? For the icon, I'll say it'll be trash to icon. Let's import it from Lucid React. And then I'll say class name size of 4, let's say. Okay, for the button, I'll say class name btn ghost, and then btn x small. Finally, text will be error, so that we can get that red color. Okay, let's save and take a look at the output. This is what we got. I think it is working as expected. We will update the background color so that it is highlighted, just like in the demo application. And notice how the date is formatted right here, but here it's looking disgusting, right? So let's try to fix it. For this, we will create a custom function. I'll put it under the front end, under the source. Let's create a lib folder, and I'll say utils.js. So we'll put a utility function that will basically format the date. So it is around 7 lines of code. You can copy it and paste it from the source code, or type this out however you wish. We'll be using this. Basically, instead of just putting it, we will wrap this with format date function. So I'll paste this in. Let's try to import it. I'll say import format date from, let's go one above, under the lib, under the utils. Hopefully it should be working out. Let's refresh. I think it says this is not a function. Do we need to convert this to a date? I'll say new date. Paste this in. Hopefully it should work out. Okay, now we don't really have any errors and it is formatted just like this one. Now, as you can imagine, these actions doesn't really work at the moment. If you click to them, it'll take you to the detail page, right? So this is the ID of this node. And if you click to this one, it'll take you to that page. We will implement the functionalities a little bit later in the tutorial. But for now, this should be it for the homepage. Just before we end this section, I'd like to update the background as well as add this effect that we have at the very bottom. I'm not really sure if it is visible, but we'll see this in action right now. So just head over to app.jsx. Under the source code, under the app.jsx, you will find a div that should look like this. I'll go ahead, paste this in. Okay, so just go ahead, copy and paste and delete the data theme for now. Let's say class name will be relative. Let's say height full and width full. Okay, let's save and take a look at the output. This is what we got. It's been updated. Background is black. Let's say this effect has been added. So let's refresh. It is working as expected. Now, if you try to add the data theme, let's try to paste this in. Let's see what will happen. Now, as you can tell, we cannot really see the effects, right? Because they have been overwritten with the data theme of forest. So if you delete this, it should still work out in this case, even though we are not using the data theme. It's because we only have this theme under the themes. So it understands that it should use the forest theme. I hope that makes sense. So for now, that's it for the entire homepage, where we have a use effect that we fetch the nodes, we update our state. If we have any errors, we will update the rate limiting as well as the UI, but else we'll just show the nodes. Okay, so let's leave it. Let's leave this section at this point, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, so let's build the create page. This is the UI that we're gonna have at the end of the section, where we have the title, content, and then a button where we can submit the form. So let's first build the UI and then we will build the functionality. Okay, so I'll go under the create page file and get started with it. So first I'll create some states. So let's say we will have the title. Let's say use state, import that. And by default, this could be an empty string. Then we'll have the same thing for content. So we are creating these states so that we can keep track of the input that user puts in, right? And then let's have another state for the loading state, right? I'll say const loading, let's say set loading. By default, this is going to be false. Once they submit the form, we will say it'll be equal to true. Okay, now I'll create a function as well. Let's say handle submit. Once they submit the form, we would like to run this function. But first, let's build the UI. Okay, so I'll have the div. Let's say class name will be minimum height of screen. Then we can say background base of 200. And then let's go within this div. I'll create another one. Let's say it'll take the class name of container. Let's center this, MX auto. I'll say horizontally padding will be 4, but vertically it'll be 8. And then we'll go ahead and say one more div. I think we can add the maximum width of 2x large. And then MX auto to center it. Then I'll have this link. So it is this one that will take us to the home page. So let's import it from React router. I'll say to the home page, and then the class name, button ghost, and then margin bottom of 6. For the content, we will put this icon. So let's go here. I'll say arrow left icon. This is something that we would like to import from Lucid React. And then I'll say class name size of 5. Okay, right after the icon, still within the link, I'll say back to notes. Okay, let's just see the output. I'll visit the create page. If we click to this, we should be able to visit the create page. Okay, now let's build the rest of it. Right after the link, I'll have a div with the class name of card and let's say background base of 100. Then we'll go ahead create a div with the class name of card-body. Within this div, I'll have the card title. So let's say h2 class name of card-title. Let's say text of 2x large, margin bottom of 4. And then let's say create new node. Right after the h2, I'll have a form. Now this will not take any actions, but instead it'll take the onSubmit. So once user submits this form, we will call our method, let's say handle submit, and then we can have the, let's say, the form controls. I'll have a div, let me scroll. We'll say class form-control, margin bottom of 4. So first we'll have the label. Let's say create a label with the class name of label. Now we don't really need the HTML4, I'll delete that. Let's say this will take the span label-text and we can say it'll be title. Okay, let's save. That's the very first label that we have. Right after this one, we'll say the input type will be text. Let's say placeholder is going to be node title. And then we'll say class name is going to be input ordered. Okay, finally, we'll add the value, which will be the title state, so that we just bind it. And then on change, once user types in, we would like to get that value and update our state. So I'll say set title event.target.value. Okay, so that's gonna be it for the very first input that we have, right? Now let's build the next one, which is the content. So this will be a text area component that we'll be using. So it's the exact same thing. Right after this form control, I'll just paste this in. You can pause the video and type this in. You have the form control with the label and then the text area where the value will be the content, right? And we will update that state. So right after this div, but still within the form, we will create the card actions. And let's say justify end, so that the button is at the very right hand side, right? So it is at the end within this row. Okay, now I'll say the button where the type will be equal to submit. Let's say class name will be btn and btn primary. Now I'll also say that this will be disabled if we are in the loading state. And then let's say if we are loading, we can put this part, else we'll put this part. So if we're in the loading state, we can say something like creating ... And then if we are not in the loading state, we'll just say create node. Okay, so this is what we have. Let's just say we are in the loading state. I'll say true. So this is disabled now. I cannot click to it and it says creating. But by default, this will be false. Now we can build the handle submit function. So once we submit the form, for now, let's say console log the title as well as the content. Now, if you try to do it in this way, once you submit the form, it will refresh the page. So let's open up the terminal. I'll put my title and let's say my content. Once I submit it, it'll refresh the page, right? So if you don't want this happen, you would say get the event and first just prevent the default behavior, right? So that it doesn't really refresh the page. So I'll refresh and try to do it once again. Let's say my title and any value can go here. Let's submit it. It is not going to refresh the page. So we got these values. Okay, but we don't really want to console log it. Instead, we would like to send a request. So first, I'd like to have some validation, right? I'll say if title is not, if it is not provided, or let's say if the content is not provided, we will throw an error, right? So I'll say if no title or no content, then we'll say toast, let's import it, dot error, I'll say all fields are required. And I'll just return out of this function. Now I would like to also trim this so that if they put an empty value, still we don't really want to accept it. Okay, let's save and give it a go. I'll refresh without any values. If I try to submit it, we'll get an error. But if they provide some values, we can set the loading state to be true and have our try and catch block. And let's even have the finally as well. Finally, we would like to have the set loading state to be false. Now in the try, we will send a request. So let's say const, or we don't really need to get the response, right? So I'll say await. Let's say this will be an async function so that we can use await. I'll say Axios.post method because we would like to create something. And our endpoint, let's type this out. Localhost 5001/API/notes. Now we would like to send some body, right? I'll add this object where we'll add the title as well as the content. Okay, so once this is done successfully, we can say toast.success, node created successfully. And then we can take the user, let's say navigate them to the home page. But how do we do it? So I will get this navigate function and I'll navigate the user to the home page. So to be able to get this, we can say const navigate, and we will grab this from the use navigate hook, which is coming from React router. Okay, in the catch, we can just put a toast.error, let's say failed to create node. Please try again later or something like that. I'll just leave it as it is and let's console log it. Okay, so I'll go ahead and save this and let's give it a go. I'll say, let me just refresh. I'll say learn something, and for the content, let's say something random. Let's create the node. We have the loading state, node created successfully. We are in the home page and it looks like it has been added to the database. So this is what we got. Let's refresh. It is still here. Let's take a look at the database. So previously we had 2 values. Now we should have 3 documents, right? Okay, so this is the very latest one that has just been added, which means everything is working as expected. Now let's try to create another one, but let's say if you didn't have this validation, right? So I'll just delete this and try to create a node without a title or content. So we're going to hit the catch block. Here we can see it says fail to create node, and we can open up the terminal. This is the error that we have. Let's see what backend returned us. So under the response data, we have the internal server error, right? So we don't really want to return the exact response message back to the client because we might leak something, right? But at least user is able to see something failed, right? We at least give them a feedback. So this is perfectly fine to have it, but most of the time you would like to add the client validation as well, so that you can put a meaningful answer. Okay, so that's kind of it for the handle submit function. And just like in the home page, if you wanted to, you can add the rate limiting error case as well, right? So imagine if they are trying to abuse our API, right? They are just non-stop sending requests. At some point, it's going to rate limit it. So if you wanted to check this out, you can go under the catch. And here I'll say, let's delete this for a second. I'll say if if error dot response dot status, if it is equal to the rate limiting, right, for 29. In this case, I'll say return a custom toast. I'll say toast.error. The message could be something like slow down, you are creating nodes too fast. Let's capitalize this. And then if you wanted to, you can update some configurations, right? You can add some options. Let's say the duration is going to be 4 seconds. So let's say 4000 milliseconds, which is equal to 4 seconds. And then we can update the icon. Let's go with this school icon, right? Skull icon. But in the else case, I'll just have what we have copied a couple of seconds ago, right? If it is not the rate limiting, we'll just put the general error message. And to be able to test out if this is working or not, you can scroll to the top and get rid of this client validation so that we can actually hit the API and get rate limited. So go ahead, comment this out or delete it, save this file, and let's give it a go. So I'd like to just send requests nonstop, right? Let me just refresh the page and go ahead, send requests. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think at some point it's going to be rate limited. As you can tell, we cannot really send any more requests, right? It says slow down, you're creating nodes too fast. Once it is resetted, we should be able to send the requests. Now we can go back and uncomment this so that it is working as expected. So that's it for the create page, but there is something kind of annoying to me, right? Let's try to see what that is. Now, if you have realized, in every single page or in every single component, if we need to send a request, every single time we need to type this out, right? This part is always exactly the same. What we can do is to create a global instance and extract it. So let's see what I mean. I'll go under the lib. I'll create this Axios.js file. So this is something really common that we'll see. This is something that you'll see almost in every single large project, and you'll like to implement it by yourself as well. So let's say import Axios from Axios package, and then we can create an instance. So say Axios instance. Some people call it as Axios instance or API. It's completely optional. So let's go with API in this case. I'll say Axios.create, and we would like to create an instance. So I'll say open up this config where the base URL is equal to HTTP, let's say localhost 5001/API. Now you can also put the nodes, but I wouldn't really recommend this for a reason that I'll explain. For now, just put the API and then go ahead, say export default this API and save the file. So now you can go back into the home page where we are using the Axios.get. So instead we'll say Axios instance and we would like to import it. So delete this and say import, let's say import Axios instance, or sorry, it was called as API, right? We have called this as API. We'll say API.get. Now we are using this instance that we have created. So that means we don't really need to type this out because it is already under the base URL, right? So we can just say /nodes. Now this has been prefixed with this already. I hope that makes sense. Let's do the exact same thing for the create page. Here I'll go ahead. Let's just type this out actually. I'll say API and let's import it. Here, this part is already typed out, so we can delete that. Now you might be asking, we already have the nodes both here and here. Why don't we include the nodes right here under the base URL? So you don't really want to do it. It's because, let's say tomorrow you will add more features to this application. Let's say you will have an authentication page. This time you will send a request to /API/users. So you don't really want to go back and update this file. So instead, let's say tomorrow you'll add this new feature. You can just say api.post or delete, whatever that is, /users. Now this has been prefixed with this one, right? Let me copy it. Okay, so this is what you have at the moment. So I hope that makes sense. You don't really want to put anything after the API. So at least this is what we would like to do in this case, right here in this project. Let's delete this import. We are not using it. Okay, so this is how we can optimize our code, make it a little bit more organized. Now we don't really need to type this out every single time whenever we send a request to our API. Okay, so with this, we can leave this section right here, and I'll see you in the next one. Now let's add the delete functionality. For this, I'll go under the node card component, right? This is where we have that button. Okay, so right here, once we click to this button, we'd like to delete something. But now we have some kind of an issue. Let's see what that is. I'll say const handle delete. Let's say handle delete. This is the function. Let's create it. Let's say this will be async. Okay, so we'll get the event by default, and I'll say when we click to this button, let's say onClick, go ahead and call this function. So I would like to send the event. Now I'll say call this method where we are calling the handle delete, pass the event. This is what you get by default, and then we would like to pass the node ID so that we know which node that we are trying to delete, right? So we'll say node.id, and let's grab it as the ID, right? Now in this function, we will try to send a request to our API. But the thing is, let's see, if you click to this button, it'll immediately take you to the detail page because this entire thing is a link, right? This entire node card is a link. So what we can do is get the event and prevent the default behavior. So I'll say event.prevent default so that it doesn't navigate us, right? Let's say get rid of the navigation behavior. Let's save and test this out. If I click to the card, it'll take me to this page, but if I click to the icon, right, the delete button, I'll not be navigated because we just prevented that behavior. Okay, now that we have this, we can just ask for a confirmation. I'll say if not window.confirm. We can say, are you sure to delete this node? So this is my message, and if they say no, then we'll just return out of this function without doing anything. But if they say yes, we would like to go ahead and delete that. For now, let's save and see this in action. This is the confirmation that you would get. If you say cancel, nothing would happen. But if you say okay, we would like to run this try and catch block, right? So under the try, let's say import the API. This is something that we have. This is something that we created. Let's say from will go up under the lib, under the Axios, right? We'll say await API. Now we would like to delete something, so we'll send a delete method or a delete request. Let's say send a request to /notes / whatever the ID is, right? And we would like to grab this by doing this, and then we can say toast.success. I don't know why my VS Code does not work, the auto completion, but let's see. I'll say import toast from React.toast. I'll say toast.error, success, not error, because we are in the try block. I'll say node deleted successfully. And in the catch, I can just put a console log, or I'll just put the toast.error, let's say failed to delete the node. And let's put the console log as well. Let's say error and handle delete and put the error message. Okay, so let's save. Super simple function that we have for the deletion, and let's give it a go. I'd like to delete this one. Let's say okay. Now node deleted successfully, right? But UI has not been updated. If you refresh that, it's gone. And if you take a look at the database, it should be gone as well. Okay, so it is not here. That means it has actually been deleted. But now I want to update the UI as soon as I delete the node. So for this, let's see how we can do it. We have the node card component, right? And this is under the homepage. So we have all of our nodes that are stored in this state. Now, once we delete them, we would like to update this state and just filter that out. So I will send the set nodes under the node card, right? I'll say set nodes. This is the setter function. Let's go ahead and grab this. And once we delete it successfully, we can say update this state, right? I'll say just get all the previous nodes, but just filter out the one that we have deleted. So I'll say previous.filter, which is an array method. We can get every single node and just say node._id if it is not equal to this ID. So this will basically get rid of the deleted one from the array, right? So let's save and give it a go. I'll delete this one. Let's say, okay, UI has been updated immediately. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Now let's delete this one as well. Now what happens if we don't have anything in the database? So we don't really see anything, which is fine, but I think it would be better if we say something like no nodes found, right? You don't really have anything, just go ahead and create something. So let's try to put that UI. I'll go under the home page. Here we can put that conditional rendering. I'll say if nodes dot length, if it is equal to 0, and if we are not rate limited, let's say rate is rate limited. In this case, we can return this UI. I'll say nodes not found. This is a component that we'll create in a second. So let's go under the components and say nodes not found .jsx, import it from this file. Okay, so now we can build the UI. So this has nothing to do with logic, it's only some CSS classes. That's why I'll just copy and paste. You can grab this from the source code, head over to components, into this file, copy it and paste it. We have one icon, one link, and just some texts. Let's save and test this out. Okay, so this is how the UI will look like. We got the icon, some text, and then a button. If you click to it, that will take you to the create page. And I think we have just completed this section as well. So we have added the delete functionality right here on the node card component. And once we done this successfully, we would like to update the UI immediately. And to be able to make that work, we got this setter method, which we sent from the homepage, right? And then we just use the filter method to be able to get rid of the one that has been deleted. Okay, so I hope everything makes sense. In the next section, we can implement the update functionality. So I'll see you there. Alright, so in this section, let's try to build the detail page, right? So when you click to one of these nodes, or if you click to this update button, you'll be redirected to this page where we can fetch the node details, such as the title as well as the content. And if we wanted to, we can update them. And finally, we can delete them if we really wanted to. Okay, so let's get started with it. It'll be under the node detail page. So before we build the UI, let's create our states. So I'll have the node, let's say set node. Initially, it could be null. And we will try to fetch it from the API, right? And then let's have the loading state. Let's say set loading. Let's say use state. Initially, this will be equal to true. And then we can have the saving state. Again, I'll say saving, set saving. Let's say use state. By default, this is going to be false. So when we submit the form, we'd like to have some loading state. That's what we are creating, right? And then I will get the navigate function from the use navigate. And then one more thing, how do we get the ID from the URL? So let's try to visit this page. let's first create something. I'll just say my first node and some content. Let's try to submit this. If I click to this, we have an ID in the URL. Now, how do we get this value? So there is a hook that we can use called useParams, and from here we can destructure the ID. Now we are calling this as ID because this is what we put. If you had something else like IDX, then this should be IDX, right? Just keep that in mind. Now let's say console log, let's say just ID. Open up the terminal, refresh the page. This is the ID that we are grabbing from the URL. Okay, and if you wrap anything with an object, when you're console logging it, it'll be formatted in this way. So this is something that I almost always do. It's really convenient. Like, it's really convenient to visualize it in the terminal. So instead of saying something like ID is here and then put the ID, just wrap it with curly braces. Okay, now we got this value as well. Let's try to fetch the actual node. I'll create a use effect. So this will be really simple. This is something that we have done in the past. Whenever the ID changes, we would like to run this use effect, right? So let's say I'll have a function called fetch node. Let's say this will be an async function that we would like to call in this use effect. Now let's say we'll have the try and catch block, and let's actually add the finally block as well, where the loading state will be equal to false. So in the try, we will say const response, let's say await, import the API, the get method, let's say slash nodes slash whatever the ID is that is coming from the URL. So we'll get the node. You can console log it, but I'll just set the node state with it. I'll say res.data. In the catch, we can just put a toast error. I'll say failed to fetch the node, let's say. If you wanted to, you can add this check that we have done in the past. So the rate limiting check, I'll just skip that because we have already done this. And I'll just add a console log, let's say error in fetching node. Okay, now we can console log this. Let's say console log the node itself. So initially it'll be null. Once it has been fetched, this state will be updated, right? This is what we got. The content, created that, title, updated that, and the ID. So this is another field that has been added by MongoDB by default, but you can just ignore this completely. Okay, now that we got the data, let's try to visualize it in the UI. And just before we build the UI, I'd like to handle the loading state. So I'll say if you are in the loading state, I'd like to return this part. Let me go ahead, paste this in. Basically, we have a div with the loader icon. Let's import it from Lucid React. It is taking the animate spin class so that it can spin. So for a split second, we are able to see it. Let's just say true. So let's say true so that we can see it in action. Okay, so this is what we're gonna get if you are in the loading state. Now let's build the return statement. I'll say return this div where we have the class name of minimum height screen. Then I'll say background base of 200. Then within this, I'll have the container. Let's say it'll take the mx auto and padding x of 4, y of 8. And then within this div, I'll have one more div that will be the back link. So I'd like to paste this in. It's like link and then the button. Let's import the trash icon, arrow left icon, the link as well. And then let's create this handle delete function. So here I'll just say const handle delete. Let's leave it as an empty function for now. Okay, now let's take a look at the output. This is what we have at the moment. Now this is taking the entire space. What I'd like to have, they are like wrapped. It is a little bit more smaller. Let's try to maybe cut this entire thing, or without cutting, we can wrap this with maximum width of 2x large, and Let's fix this. Then I'll say mx will be auto. Now let's try to wrap this. Okay, now UI has been updated. It is taking only this amount of space. Then we can build the card itself. So right after this div, so maybe right after this one. Okay, so just go ahead, shrink this, still under the maximum width of 2x large. We'll say create the card, background base of 100, and let's get into the UI. So this is something that we have done in the past. First, let's create the card body. Within the card body, we will have the form control. So I'd like to copy and paste around 10 lines of code. So we have a label and then the input, that is type of text. This is the placeholder, class name, value, as well as the onChange handler, right? So that's the very first thing. Let's save and take a look at the output. Okay, now by default, we get the value because we say the value will be node.title. And when we type something in, it'll only update the title. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Right after this form control, just go and give a little bit space and paste this in. We have another form control with the text area, and this time it is content. Okay, let's save and take a look at the output. Okay, this is what we have. Now finally, let's put the button. So shrink the form control. Go ahead, create the card actions. And let's say justify and let's say we'll have the button with the class name of btn and btn primary. This would be disabled if we are in the loading state, or sorry, if we are in the saving state, right? This is the state that we have created for this specifically. And then let's say on click, we are going to call a function called handle save. Let's try to create it. I will duplicate this. Let's say handle save and leave it empty for now. Finally, we can put the UI, or the text I should say, the content. Here I'll say if we are saving, we would like to say saving ... but else we'll say save changes. Let's save and take a look at the output. Okay, this is what we have. This is the output that we would like to have. Now first, let's handle the delete function. So I'll go right here under the handle delete. This is the exact same thing that we have done in the past. So first I'll ask for the confirmation. Let me copy and paste. We'll say if user wants to delete it or not, right? Let's just double check that. But if they want to delete it, if they actually want to delete it, we'll go under the try and catch block where we would like to send a delete request. Let's say this will be an async function, import the API. I think we already have it. So we'll just send a delete request to this endpoint. And then if it is done successfully, we can show a toast. And then we can navigate them. Let's say navigate to the homepage. In the catch block, we can put a console log as well as the error toast. So this is something that we have done in the past. That's why I didn't type this out. I just copied and pasted, super simple. So for now, everyone understand what this does. Now let's try to test this out. I'll say delete this node, and if I say cancel, nothing would happen. But if I say okay, it's going to be deleted, and now I am in the home screen. Let's create one more thing. Let's say another post. I'd like to create one more. Okay, so let's try to update this one. We'll go into this function. So first I'll say if there is not node.title, and let's even use the trim method. Or we'll say if node.content is not provided. In this case, we'll say please add a title or content, right? And then I'll say return out of this function. Now let's try to do it. Here I'll go ahead, delete this and this one. Okay, so we need to add at least one of them. Let's go ahead, add this one. So still we are getting an error. Actually, we should have both of them because in our model, In the node model, we said that both of them are required, and this is exactly what we are checking in the client side. Okay, if we try to save, now it should work, but we don't have the function. Let's try to complete it. First, I'll say set saving will be true, and I'll have the try and catch block, and finally the finally block. I'll say set saving will be equal to false, but in the try we would like to send a request. Let's say await API dot put request to our endpoint, which is, let's say, /nodes/ whatever the ID is, and then the node that we would like to update. So I'll just pass the node object as the second argument. Now we need to say async so that we can use await. Once this is done successfully, we can say node updated successfully, and then under the catch we can handle it properly. Okay, so this is what I just copied and pasted. Let's try to save and give it a go. I'll say another post 1, 2, 3, right? This is what we have updated, and let's say some content just got updated. Okay, it's been updated. Let's take a look at the homepage. Here we can see the title and then the content. Now what you can do also, once you have updated successfully, you can navigate them to the homepage. Let's actually do it and test this out. I'll say one more is also updated. Once it is updated, right here you're in the home screen. And I think with that we have completed this section as well. Now all of our pages working properly. Now one more quick note, if you're wondering where do I get this kind of a pattern that looks like this, so there is a website called bg.ibilic.com. I don't know how you pronounce it, but this is the website where they have a bunch of different patterns, so you can preview it, right? Like we have this one, all these, and I think this is the one that I have used. So you can copy the code, and I just changed the color as well as the height. So this is, I think, a little bit more longer than what we have, right? So I just changed the height as well as the color. You can use different things if you really wanted to. Okay, so this is something that I wanted to mention. And the very last thing that we need to do is to deploy this application, which is going to be in the next section. So I'll see you there. Alright, so it is time to deploy our application. Now first I have some notes. Let's try to see it on the diagram. Now the first thing we would like to do is to push our code to GitHub. Once our code is live on GitHub, we will use a platform called render.com. They have a free plan, so we don't really need to pay anything to deploy our application, right? So we're going to push our code to GitHub, and then they will take our code and deploy it on their platform. Now, if we want to push our code to GitHub, we would like to hide the .env file, right? Because we don't really want to push those to GitHub. We would like to hide them so that no one can see those credentials. For this, we would like to create a gitignore file. Now here we already have it. I'd like to take this and put it right here in the root so that it can apply to both of these folders. And then at the very end, I'll say just ignore the .env file as well so that this file is not pushed to GitHub. Now let's open up the terminal, and I have killed the backend as well as frontend. Now I am under the root, which is here, right? Let's say initialize this as a git repo. Let's say git init. Okay, so an empty git repository has been initialized. So if you take a look at it, the node modules have been ignored both here and under the backend, as well as the .env file. So now if we push our code to GitHub, we will not see the dependencies, we will not see the .env file as well as these dependencies, right? And let's actually try to do it maybe. So we can say, so I will say git add everything, right? And let's say git commit with the message, let's say initial commit. Okay, so I'll just push my changes. but this has just been added to the staging area. Now we would like to create an empty folder, an empty repository. Here, let's just call this as thinkboard, or should I call this something else? So this is the repository name that I'll be going with. Let me just zoom in. For now, it'll be private. Once I publish this video, it'll be public. So for now, let's say private, and I will create it. Now I'll just go ahead, copy this because we already added our commits, right? We committed our changes, and I think just a couple of seconds ago I said it'll be in the staging area, but not really. It's been even committed, right? Okay, so let's say just paste this in. It'll take everything that we have and push it to this repository. Let's refresh. Okay, now here we can see under the backend, we don't really have node modules and we don't have the .env file. And same thing for the front end. We don't really have the node modules right here. But now if render.com wants to deploy our app, they want to get the node modules, right? Without that, our application would not work. So for this, we will create a file right here so that they can install our dependencies. So here I'll clear up my terminal. Under the root, I'll say npm init-y, which is going to create a package.json file. So within this file, we will manage both the front end and back end. So we will deploy both of them from here. So we'll have two different scripts. I know that this might look a little bit complicated for now, but just follow along with me. In like 5 minutes, everything should be clear. So we'll have a build commit, build script, where we'd like to install the node modules for backend as well as the front end. So here I'll say, go ahead, run npm install first for the backend. So I'll say, run this under the backend folder. We can say -- prefix backend. Once you have done this, go ahead and do the same thing for the front end, right? So I'll say npm install -- prefix front end. Okay, let's save. Now I'll go ahead and delete these node modules. And let's try to run this command. So I will say npm run build, which is going to install the dependencies for the backend as well as for the front end. I'll just run that. And now here you can see we got both of these node modules. Okay, so for now, let's ignore this warning. And under this build command, we would like to add one more thing. So in production, you would like to always build your front-end application so that everything that you have here will be optimized and it'll be put under a special folder called dist. So let's see, what does that mean? I'll say once you installed all the dependencies, just go ahead and run this command as well, which is npm run build, but run this under the front end. So let's say -- prefix front end. Now let's save and try to run this command once again. So it'll go ahead, install the dependencies, and then it'll try to build the front-end application. Now, if you can see, we have the dist folder, which is the optimized version of the React application that we have built. Okay, now we would like to deploy everything that we have, right? Now, the current state of our application is this one. So we have the React application under this port and our API under this port. Now, what I'd like to do is take the entire front end, right? Basically, serve this under the same domain. So we don't really want to have two different domains, even though you can have it, right? It is just completely optional. If you wanted to, you can deploy this separately and deploy your backend separately, right? But what I'll be doing is to take everything, serve it under a single domain, right? So let's say if we visit my website.com, we are both going to see the React application and we can send requests to our API as well. So we'll see what that means. So for now, just keep that in mind. This is the deployment model that we would like to have. Okay, now one more thing. If we have both the client and backend under the same domain, that means we can get rid of the CORS errors, right? So okay. So previously we said that if you have two different domains, you need to set up the CORS, but now we'll have only one. so we can get rid of the course configuration. Okay, let's see how we can do it. First, I'll go under the backend. Under the server.js file, we'll just write a little bit code to deploy this correctly. Now let's import the path package, which is something that is built into Node. You don't really need to say npm install path. It is already provided. Okay, so just scroll to the very bottom. Right after your API routes, we will add a configuration. So we will use a different middleware that is coming from Express. So let's see how that works. I'll say app.use express.static. I'll say, let's call this method with the path.join. Now here we will put a path for the frontend dist folder. Now let's try to create a variable. Let's say const underscore underscore their name. This is the convention. We'll say path.resolve. Call the method. Now if you console log this, if you say console log their name, it'll give you the source for the backend, right? From here, we would like to go one up so that we can go under the front end. From here, we'll go under the dist folder. Okay, so let's see how we can type this out. I'll say within the path.join method, just go ahead, get the their name. Now we are under the backend. Let's go one up, and from here, we'll go under the front end, and then we'll go under the dist folder. Now this basically says, serve our optimized React application, like serve this as a static asset, right? So once again, we are under the backend, right? So we are here, we said go one up, so you are in the root, go under the front end and find this dist folder, make it a static, just serve them because they are our static assets. And then we'll say, if we got any kind of requests, so say app.get any route. So if we get a get request, any route other than these, right? Anything other than our API nodes, we would like to serve our React application. So we're gonna run our controller, let's say request and response. I'll say res.send file. We'll say path.join. Let's say underscore underscore their name. Again, we would like to go one up under the front end. Let's say this time we'll go under the dist again, but we would like to serve the index.html file. So under the dist, this is where your React application will be started. So this is the file that we would like to display. Let's say index.html. Okay, but we only want to do this if we are in the production, right? We only want to do this if the application is on render.com. So I'll go ahead, cut this. I'll say if we are in the production, and we can do it with an environment variable. I'll say process.env.node_env. If it is equal to production, only then go ahead, implement this, right? And then we can do the same thing for the course. As I said, this is only needed in development because in development we have two different domains. In production, we will have only one, right? So we can say if process.env.node.env, if it is equal to, let's say if it is not equal to production, only then add the course configuration. Okay, so let's try to save this. Now, one more thing that we need to do. Now, once we build our application, we would like to start it, right? So to be able to start that, we will add a start command. This is the command that render will run. So let's say npm run start. Run this command under the backend. So once you run npm run start under the backend, it'll go ahead, let's see, it'll go ahead run this script, which is going to start our application. Now let's save and we can test this out without even deploying. I'll go ahead, open up the terminal. Let's clear this up. I'll say npm run build. This is going to build our application, install all the dependencies, and then we can say npm, let me clear this up. I'll say npm run start. Now this will start our application. So if you visit localhost 5001, now normally we would get our API, but now we will get both the API and the React application. Looks like we couldn't. Let's see why this is the case. It says 404 not found. Well, of course, this is the error that we will get because we forgot to set up the node env, right? Let's say node underscore env is equal to production. Let's say production, and we don't really need even codes. So this is what we'll have in the render.com, but when you are developing the application, you would like to mostly say development. But just to test this out, let's say production, and I'll kill this, run this once again. Now we can refresh this page. So under the backend URL, right, we are able to get the React application because it has been served under the server.js. So we said if we are in the production, go ahead and serve the React application, which is under the this index.html. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Now I will explain this once again. Let's try to complete this. One more thing that we need to do, we'll go under the front end. I think this is the very last thing under the Axios.js. So here we need to update something. So here we say that our base URL is localhost 5001, which is absolutely fine in development. But when we deploy the application, we will get a different URL, right? So I don't know what render will give us, but let's say it'll be something like my example webapp.com. We don't really know what the URL is going to be. In production, we don't really have something like localhost. So we will make this to be dynamic. So I'll say, let's create a base URL. Now we can check for the environment in Vite by doing import.meta.env.mode. So we'll say if this is equal to development, in this case, our base URL could be this one. So I'll cut this out, paste this in. But in production, we'll say whatever that is, /API, right? Okay, so this will make it to be dynamic. And now let's say the base URL is going to be this value. So I have just added a comment, just like what I have said. In production, there is nothing called localhost, so we have to make this to be dynamic. Okay, so that's everything that we would need. Let me pretty quickly go over this, and we will push these changes so that render can deploy it. Okay, so the first thing we have done is to add the package.json under the root so that we can add the build command. So we need to install the dependencies for the backend as well as the front end. Now, why this is the case? Because in GitHub, we don't really have those node modules, right? So render cannot see those. So for that reason, we will say, hey, render, go ahead and install the dependencies and then just build the front-end application so that you can get the optimized version of the React app. And once you have done this, you can start the app by running this command under the backend. And then under the backend, under the server.js, we have added this configuration where we said if we are in the production environment, go ahead, serve the React application as the static assets. And then if they visit any route other than APIs, other than the API, just go ahead, render the React app. So that if we visit localhost 5001, instead of getting only API, we will get the React app as well. Okay, and then we also get rid of the course configuration in the production because now we have only one domain. Okay, so that's it. And at the very end, we have added the node env to be production, but of course, this should be development. Only in production. In render.com, we will make it to be production. Okay, so let's save and kill our application. Now we can, let's say, commit our changes, right? I'll say git add all. I'll say git commit -m. Let's say something like prepared for the deployment. And so this is the entire thing that I have. Let's just commit this change and I'll say git push. So hopefully we should be able to get the latest changes. Okay, just now this is what we got. Now I'll visit render.com So they have a free plan that you don't really need to pay. Here we can see. And I already have an account, so I'll just log in with my GitHub account. Okay, so I have already deployed the test version like 1 hour ago, but let's try to do it from scratch. So I just did this so that I don't really get any errors and give you the best result. So now let's try to deploy this repository. I'll say deploy a web service, which is going to be this one, right? It says 1 minute ago. Let's wait for this to load. So just leave everything as it is, but we would like to update the build command. So for this, we would like to run this one, npm run build, and then to start the application, we'll say npm run start. So the build command is going to be npm run build, and the start command will be npm run start. Okay, I'll say use the free plan. We don't really need to pay anything. And then I'll go under the environment variables. Let's copy everything that we have right here. And then paste this in. So like I'll say, just go ahead and delete the node env. Don't even put the production. It'll understand that it is under the production. So just don't put the node env. You can put these 4 different values, and then we can just say deploy the web service. Before we do so, I would like to talk about the free plan. Now, since this is the free plan, it'll go inactive after 15 minutes. So let's say you deploy the application, but you don't visit it for 15 minutes, it'll go inactive. So for the next time you visit the application, it'll take about 1 minute for that to load, right? So just keep that in mind. If you would like to always have this open, maybe you can go with the cheapest plan that is possible, which is $7 per month. But in this case, I'll go with the free plan. Let's say deploy the web service. Now, I think this will take around 2 to maybe 3 minutes. So let's wait for this to complete, and then I'll just come back to the video. And by the way, here you can see it'll first run the npm run build. So it runs the npm run build, it'll get the dependencies. Okay, this is really annoying. It just scrolls down, but it'll get the dependencies for the backend, for the front end, and then it'll build the React application. And then it'll try to hopefully deploy the app successfully. So it says front-end build was successfully done. So let's wait for this to be live. Alright, so looks like MongoDB connected successfully. Server started and our service is live. Let's just put a pretty quick confetti because why not? Okay, now it is live. So it'll give us a URL. Let's scroll to the top. This is what we have. I'll just click to it. Here we go. We got our React application. So we can create another one. Let's say from the production. Say it is live successfully. It's been created and we can see it. It's on the UI, right? So that means everything works successfully. We can delete it if we really wanted to. We can update one. Let's say something different. Here we can see, and it should be completely responsive as well. Alright. So that's the entire application. There is one more thing that I'd like to update. Let's visit the upstash.js file. Here we have a comment, but we have updated the value. It is not really matching with what we have. So let's say 100 requests per minute. I'll say 60 seconds. You can update this value, but this is what I'll have in the source code. So I think that's gonna be it for the entire application. We have built an entire backend, an entire API, as well as a complete React application. And then we have connected both of them, and we have even deployed the app. So this was one of the most comprehensive beginner-friendly tutorial that I have ever made. Seriously, like I could record this entire thing in 1 hour, but I think it's now more than 3 hours because we just went into the super details. And I'll leave the diagram link in the description. You can take this, just have it as a note. there's a lot of cool information right here in this diagram. So we have more complex projects with this exact tech stack that you can check this out, right? You can check out. I'll just add this very last commit and then end this tutorial. So let's say git add everything, git commit -m, let's say ups-the.js file updated, or I'll say rate limiter updated. I'll say git push. And one more thing, whenever you add more changes, new changes, render will see that change from your GitHub account, right? It'll immediately see that you have a new change, so it'll go ahead and try to deploy it so that you can get the very latest version, right? As you can tell, now it is deploying, and you can take a look at the logs just to see if it is going to complete successfully or not. In our case, it is done successfully, so I hope you enjoyed the entire tutorial. Once again, congratulations for watching this entire tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the very next one.